Okay, I think we're waiting for a couple of county commissioners still, but we have the planning commission present, so I'll go ahead and get our agenda started here. It is February 7th. It's 4:03 p.m. and we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'm going to go through planning commission members. If you can just let me know that you're here. Obviously Heather Lindh here. Howard Tritz.
Here.
Abby Dallmann.
Here.
Bryce Ehrlich.
Here.
Joey Edwards.
Here.
And Lupe Bobadilla.
Here.
And Jamie Seiffer.
Here.
Perfect, thank you. Again, for those of you just joining us, if you could please make sure that you're muted upon arrival, and then also if you could please just make sure that your little Zoom username has your first and last name on it so that Anne can track who attended our public hearing and for public comment further along. I'll go into the process a little bit about how tonight is going to look. I'll go into detail about that here in a few minutes, but just as far as our Zoom process tonight, we will have the chat turned off, but if you have any questions or would like to add your name to the list for public comment, please send that direct message to Ann Schneider. Roll call of Lake County Commissioners. I have Commissioner Mudge.
I'm here.
Okay. Commissioner Marcella.
Here.
And Commissioner Fiedler.
Here.
Great. I don't know of any changes or additions to the agenda. And we have minutes from January 10th to approve. Did everybody have a chance to review those minutes?
Yep.
Do I have a motion to approve those?
I can move that we approve the minutes from January 10th, 2022.
Second.
Great, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We'll move down to the core of tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting is going to be a public hearing for file 21-32, which would be a Lake County Code amendment for the backcountry zoning. I'm going to start with, and I just have to transition my screens a little bit, so bear with me. Just kind of giving you all a quick rundown of how tonight's meeting will go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the opening statement for this public hearing. The Lake County Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners will now conduct a joint public hearing. The statement I am reading shall be incorporated into and made part of the record on these proceedings. The Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners have jurisdiction to conduct a joint public hearing on a land development code amendment / rezone under sections 3.8 and 3.13 of the Lake County Land Development Code. The purpose of this hearing is to consider whether the proposed amendment should be approved. In considering that matter, the Commission will address the approval criteria set forth in sections 3.89 and 3.13.3 of the Lake County Land Development Code. Due to some perceived time limitations for this evening and in accordance with the authority vested in the chair pursuant to Rule 14-4 of the Rules and Regulations of the Lake County Planning Commission, public comments will be initially limited to 2 minutes per presenter. If we end up with some additional time towards the end, we can reopen for additional comments. The procedure to be followed in this hearing will be as followed. Number 1, members of the commission and/or the board will disclose any ex parte communications. 2, the county staff will make an initial presentation. 3, the applicant may then make their presentation. 4, after that, any other persons either supporting or opposing the application may present their evidence. As such, those presentations will be limited to 2 minutes. 5, supporting and opposing witnesses may be questioned by the commission and the board of county commissioners. Once questioning is concluded, no further questioning is permitted unless granted by chair. 6, the applicant may then present any rebuttal evidence. The applicant in this scenario is actually the Lake County Planning Commission. The parties and witnesses are asked not to submit redundant, irrelevant, or cumulative evidence. If someone has already made the point that you'd like to make this evening, please just go ahead and say, I agree with so-and-so, and leave it at that. The chair will also require that all comments be made directly to the Planning Commission and the board, and there not be dialogue between other members of the audience. At the conclusion of the evidentiary portion of the hearing, the chair will entertain a motion to close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and the commission will discuss and weigh the evidence. Then there will be a motion to close the discussion phase of the public hearing. The Board of County Commissioners will then leave the meeting, and the chair of the Planning Commission will entertain a motion on the application. The motion may take form of one of the following recommendations. 1, approve the application with no conditions. 2, approve the application with recommended conditions. 3, approve the application with newly identified conditions, or 4, deny the application. The planning director shall make a record of any substantial discussion on the motion and will include that in the record with the recommendation of the commission. The commission's recommendation will be in the form of a statement of motion. Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the commission or to the form or substance of these proceedings? Hearing none, I will now ask that each planning commission member and then each county commissioner, if you have any ex parte communication or other items to disclose, and if so, please disclose them now.
I don't have any ex parte communication to disclose, but I do think it's worth disclosing that I own a 10-acre mining claim inside the proposed backcountry zone near Turquoise Lake. I went through the conditional use permit process last year and was granted a group camp CUP. But I don't think that this zone code passing or not passing has any financial incentive for me, because the conditioned use doesn't change whether the zoning is passed or not, and the group camp conditional use permit process will still be allowed under any proposed backcountry zone code.
Okay, thank you. And any other planning commission members have any disclosure they need to make? Okay, and county commissioners. Okay. County staff may now make its initial presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Lindh. This application is the culmination of over a decade of work by the Planning Commission on creating a zone district that intentionally manages and supports low impact development and growth in environmentally sensitive areas located in Lake County. Over the past 3 years, there have been 29 work sessions, public work sessions to vet this proposal. And prior to that, there have been numerous work sessions on this. So this has been a very long time and amount of dedication by the Planning Commission on bringing this code amendment forward. And the proposed boundary has unique characteristics evidenced by access challenges, environmental sensitivities, proximity to public land, lack of emergency response access, and lack of infrastructure ability. The Planning Commission suggests these areas should have a zoning that considers all of these attributes and impacts. While financial obstacles have long self-regulated development in the backcountry, this is no longer the case. Leadville Lake County is experiencing record demand on development, both through building permits and real estate sales. As Lake County is roughly 70% public land and 30% privately owned land, there's a natural scarcity of developable property. The development pressure is pushing development into these rural remote areas. The Planning Commission is suggesting it's time to consider what development is appropriate in rural areas versus allowing the market demand to pressure development into environmentally sensitive areas. The proposal outlines allowing modest structures that promote private owner use versus commercial use and requires all development to go through a site and construction plan review. Albeit a new planning proposal for Lake County, it is not new to many other communities across the state. From resort-focused areas like Pitkin and Summit County, Similar communities like Chaffee County, or even small rural areas like tiny Mineral County. All these communities share core values with the desire to preserve areas of natural beauty, limit the degree of use, and review sites to identify and mitigate adverse impacts. Existing model codes throughout the state were researched along with direct conversations with the communities to find out how well the code was received and administered. Resoundingly, we heard communities were appreciative of the zoning and felt it effectively balanced residential use and environmental stewardship. The U.S. Forest Service has assisted in modifying code language and highlighting areas of concern. The code proposal reflects discussion and contributions from a wide variety of collaborators and stakeholders. The U.S. Forest Service, Emergency Management Services, Public and Environmental Health, Law Enforcement, Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue, Search and Rescue, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the County Attorney. This code proposal creates a zone district relative to the unique characteristics of the land. It defines the zone district and the intention of the zoning. It adds a low intensity use. It reviews commercial use subject to the characteristics of the zone district. It suggests minimizing residential impact by placing a maximum dwelling size. Requires all development to go through a site and construction plan review. It creates impact minimizing standards for all use within the zone district. It regulates and permits backcountry structures, and it provides a violation compliance and hearing process. While the list of commercial uses has been narrowed down due to what could be reasonably provided in these areas, other ag, forestry, and recreation zone districts have significant differences, making something like a daycare center, for example, a more reasonable use, but obviously not a reasonable use in backcountry. While short-term rentals are proposed to be prohibited, group camps or vacation lodges proposals can apply for conditional use permit. Since the time of the first staff report, some additional information has been provided to staff, which there have been 2 slight adjustments in the code language after further review. The minimum lot size is actually not applicable for existing parcels. This means that all existing parcels will be conforming at the time of the adoption of the code. For all new parcels proposed to be created through a subdivision process, a minimum of 35 acres is required. This is to keep the intent of the low density purpose of the zoning district itself. All site plan reviews are currently decided by the Planning Commission, meaning site plan reviews for commercial development, multifamily development, and anything developed in the scenic conservation. Initially, this proposal was set to be an administrative review. However, due to limitations on staff and capacity, it is now being suggested that the site plan review process should be elevated to a Planning Commission decision similar to the site plan review of all other site plans as noted in the code. The approval criteria is of specific concern. The following findings must be made in order for the code amendment to pass. Those approval criteria are found at section 3.8.9. Specifically for a code amendment, the proposed amendment has to be consistent with the goals, objectives, policies, and other provisions of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission believes that it is compliant based on the following findings. 1.4.1, encourage implementation of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan and those adopted Lake County land use and development policies that are not inconsistent with this development code, and to repeal those policies inconsistent with the plan and this code. 1.4.2, it manages growth in a way that improves the county's quality of life. Goal 1.4.4, protect and enhances the county's natural and visual environment. Goal number 1.4.6, it promotes compatible land use relationships and prevents adverse environmental impacts. Goal number 1.4.7, it promotes predictable, consistent, and efficient land development processes for residents, neighborhoods, business, agriculture, and development interests. And goal number 1.4.8, it ensures appropriate opportunities for participation and involvement in the development process by all affected parties, and properties. The next finding is that the proposed amendment is necessary because of changing social values, new planning concepts, or other social or economic conditions. This finding is the fundamental driver that guided the Planning Commission to begin studying the backcountry. It was the focus to consider development that supports and protects the natural environment while responding to community social values in finding a way that allows low intensity development. The research relied on planning concepts demonstrated by other communities with the same goals. The timing of the code amendment is responding to economic pressure that is pushing development demand into rural areas. This work was performed in response to changing social values, new planning concepts, as well as social and economic conditions. The next finding is that the proposed amendment will promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. The Planning Commission is submitting the proposal with a strong belief the code is designed to focus on promoting the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Environmental stewardship is a priority balanced with directing development in a way that manages adverse impact to all occupants of the backcountry. Additionally, this is an application for rezoning, and the finding that must be made to allow for a rezoned application is that the proposed rezoning is found by the Planning Commission to be consistent with the Lake County Comprehensive Plan. And as previously evidenced in the previous list, those are all findings that the Planning Commission have made. The staff report includes a suggested motion for the Planning Commission. And so I would just open it up now, Madam Chairman, to any additional questions of staff that you may have in respect to the staff report.
I don't think we have any questions on the staff report, at least right now. There may be some that come up during that question, but I think maybe the best next step would be to go into the presentation, just because I think that makes a lot more sense to folks than listening to our code references. So I think the presentation will be a good next step for us.
Thank you so much. This is just a minute, I'm so sorry. This is the Backcountry Zoning Planning Commission application. This is a code amendment and a rezoning application. The Planning Commission are the advisors for the Board of County Commissioners. They advise on all issues and policies relating to planning and land use regulations and community development. Within this presentation tonight, we will talk about the economic impacts, development trends, the code development, the purpose behind the code, a review of the boundary, clarification of some of the intricacies of the code, and we will round out the presentation this evening on a recap of the town hall meeting conducted on December 13th with public comment and response. Current market trends. I'm sure many have heard that over the last 5 years, there has been a 300% increase in building permits. This correlates with statistics that have been brought forward by the Board of Realtors through the MLS, that the price per square foot is now an average of $350 a square foot. Land sales in the last 2 years, there were 330 land sales recorded in the MLS. Everyone may recall that the Herald Democrat, and this quote, as Lake County's real estate market continues to boom, demonstrating impressive growth in recent years, new developments are emerging where buildable land is available. That development pressure is pushing interest into the Lake County backcountry. The Lake County backcountry are rural and remote areas intended for low density development. They are not zoned industrial mining, and they are not lands within any subdivided area. I will now introduce Heather Lynn to talk about the purpose behind the rezone.
Thank you, Anne. So as Anne's kind of alluded to, development pressure is kind of the main driver behind this, although this topic has been one on our books for, as Anne said, probably more than 10 years. Excited to be here tonight to attempt to move this forward. You know, the idea was, you know, to control and make sure that any development in those backcountry or more sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas is a little bit more low impact. We feel that land use should be harmonious with the surrounding public lands that most of these properties are surrounded by. These are areas where there aren't basic utilities available. Emergency services are unlikely available. County road maintenance is unavailable, either seasonally or year round, and will remain unavailable for the foreseeable future through this proposal. So these are more of your seasonal access properties. The current zoning doesn't adequately address the uniqueness of those areas at all. It's combined with zoning areas that don't have those same characteristics. And another big one is protecting the view shed of our really great landscape. I think everybody likes looking around at our mountains and not seeing them littered with a bunch of houses. So I think this helps in protecting that, moving us forward. And, you know, I mean, preservation and stewardship does not always occur without taking some action. And that's where we're here tonight. Through this process, we've gone through a good series of events, I guess, to get where we are tonight, identifying areas of environmental sensitivity, minimizing the negative development impact in those areas, and you know, with the main goal of preservation. We want the intentional use to be consistent with the historic and adjacent public land use in those areas. There are several other communities, Anne mentioned this earlier, that have something, they may not call it backcountry, but they have a very similar zone district or code in their zoning. Summit County, Pitkin County, Mineral County are just a few. I think Chaffee County is still working on theirs. So this isn't a new concept. Although we have tried to make sure that this code amendment is very unique and hopefully takes into effect into account the very unique conditions that our county has with these environmentally sensitive areas. And I will hand this off to Bryce.
All right. Thank you, Heather and Ann. So yeah, given one of those big action goals that the Planning Commission was looking to do is preserve the landscape, we have some policy actions we can take. So preservation through low density development. You know, we'll have site construction and plan reviews in this proposed code, and limited commercial use. So still commercial use allowed, but through the conditional use permit process. And preservation through compliance. So this is, you know, an enforcement mechanism so that we can make sure that there's a reason and in a mode to everyone building in the backcountry so that it's not becoming just out of control and litter throughout the hillsides. Go back, we'll just explain the map just a little bit further. I know Ann and Heather have kind of touched on the points of areas of the county we're looking for to include in this zone district, but I can explain a little bit further. So you have basically clusters of patented mining claims. That's kind of what this ends up being. On the northern side of the county, we have a few different zones. We have one towards the homestake. There's just a few claims up there in the northwest side. Spanning Highway 24, you have the Mount Zion area going out to the Mosquito foothills there around the White Mountain snowmobile operation. There's two different zone districts near Turquoise Lake. So there's one on the north side, what we call the St. Keevan area. And then on the south side, we would call that the Sugarloaf Mountain area. If you look towards the east side of the county and a little bit to the south of Leadville, you have a large cluster of mining claims that are included in the zoning in the Empire Gulch area, going down into Weston Pass. South of there, we have the Granite area, some of the oldest, oh yeah, that's the Weston Pass area. South, we have the Granite area, some of the oldest mining claims in the county. To the west of that, there's Perry Peak, going towards Independence Pass, and then more clustered claims up towards Independence Pass and on the mountainsides above it. So yeah, just the biggest, we had, qualities and everything we were looking for were non-industrial mining, patented mining claims. You can see that the industrial mining area to the east side of Leadville remains untouched with this zoning code. These areas are rural and remote. Road access is limited. Emergency services are not available, like Ann and Heather alluded to. They've also have possibly inhospitable terrain, such as tundra above tree lines, steep slopes, cliffs, unstable, rocks, everything like that. And that's the reason is because they were made private from public land over 100 years ago with regard to mineral content and not for residential or recreational development. The district boundaries, I can just talk about the district boundaries real quickly, that they were intentionally drawn along public land survey system boundaries, which is why you see the squares and why it includes so much public land, because those mining claims are kind of interspersed throughout those areas. This just helps clarify in the code and make there's no ambiguity to where the boundaries are, regardless of where the mining claims may be, following that township and section lines. And it doesn't change the status of the public lands that lie within the zoning district, only to the underlying and included private parcels. Okay, ready. So a couple things that the backcountry zoning proposed code will not do. It's not going to change roads or encourage road closures or change road access or guarantee road access. This code doesn't have in it the ability or purview to touch road access, and that is a separate issue that the county wants to look at. But this code won't change any road access. It's not going to change the zoning of industrial mining parcels, and it's not going to allow the misuse of rural parcels, which is where that compliance factor comes in. And it will not guarantee emergency services to these areas. It will require a site and construction plan review process for all structures. And it will require a building permit when you choose to build a dwelling unit. And it will require a zoning permit to construct one of the limited occupancy BCZ structures that new use we're proposing. It'll require dwelling units to abide by the same requirements as in every other district. And it will require property owners to be knowledgeable about the environmental impacts of their development. I'll hand it back to Ann, I believe.
Thank you, Bryce. So every structure will have to go through a site and construction plan review, which will include the requirement for minimum site disturbance. It will not allow for development on slopes greater than 30% or 16 degrees. It will require setbacks from natural resources such as streams, water bodies, and protected wetlands. It will require trail setbacks. It will require aesthetics that blend into the natural environment. It will discourage all fencing except for wildlife-friendly fencing. All structures will be required to be dark sky compliant. There will be a tree removal review where trees cannot arbitrarily be removed, rather a fire mitigation plan for tree removal consistent and approved by the Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue. Any geologic, mining, and environmental hazards will have to be reviewed. Another very important attribute are critical fish and wildlife habitats. Also alpine tundra. And this review will call for a referral to identified stakeholders, such as the Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Environmental Health, Leadville Lake County Fire Rescue, and Public Works, just to name a few. Then I was going to talk just a little bit about the differences between what a backcountry structure is and what a single family home use is. Backcountry structures are meant to be temporarily occupied, consistent with the same requirement of alternative sanitary waste methods. That means that they can't be occupied any more than 90 days consecutively and no more than 180 days annually. Backcountry structures are meant to be no larger than 600 square feet and no taller than 20 square feet. They are meant to be single stories, keeping in mind that lofts are not considered a story. They require a plan review of construction documents, and they require the site plan review that we just talked about to address any environmental concerns. They'll require third-party inspections, and they are subject to Ordinance 9904. Ordinance 9904 talks about excessive trash, rubbish, unlicensed vehicles. Basically, it keeps these structures from being a nuisance on the land. And they are subject to compliance as discussed previously by Bryce. If a structure receives a complaint, it goes into a potential revocation hearing and may lose its certificate of completion and ability to occupy. Single-family homes have no occupancy limitation, and they must be built to the adopted residential building code. They are proposed to have a maximum square footage, and they will be required to have the same site plan review process to address environmental concerns. They will require a well and engineered septic system. They will also require third-party inspections and also not be allowed to become a nuisance on the land. Heather, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Anne. So we hosted a town hall that I think several of you attended. Thank you for doing so. And I just wanted to kind of go over a review of that. We had some public comments and questions, and I think a lot of them were really helpful in clarifying things for folks. So we thought we'd just go over them quickly here. One comment we had was the backcountry zoning proposal needs to consider wildlife habitats and impacts. And they are. Those wildlife habitats and corridors are critical aspects of the areas throughout Lake County. And under the existing current zoning, permits can be pulled to build single-family homes without any review or consideration of those habitats. Under the backcountry zoning proposal, at the time of pulling a building or backcountry structure permit, sites will be required to do that site plan review, which will take into account any of those kind of critical aspects that need to be considered. The review will look at specific attributes particular to the site with a focus of mitigating any negative identified impacts. Number two, the backcountry zone needs to consider allowing mining on patented mining claims. Public comment brought it to our attention that we had removed the conditional use permit ability on it when we proposed the zone change on these properties. The use to mine on a property is actually regulated by the state of Colorado and then reviewed by local jurisdictions. So we felt this was a reasonable modification to include in the language that the conditional use permit process would still remain for those should they go through state of Colorado approval for such. The backcountry zone needs to consider that weather will prevent building in these areas. And I think, it's climate really that was the comment on this one. And there are many building deterrents actually in this area, with climate just being one of them. But as the landscape is changing based on market demand and the cost to overcome those difficulties is no longer a barrier. So if somebody has deep enough pockets at the moment, they can overcome a lot of those barriers for access, overcoming hazards, things like that. The backcountry proposal requires structures to be built and inspected to a codified standard. Any non-compliant structures will be at risk of losing their occupancy and would be reviewed through a hearing process. And 4, the backcountry zone needs to consider the ongoing concern regarding road closures. The closure of roads and historic accesses is something that the backcountry zone does not support. Road access will remain the same regardless of this zone district change. The code language and all application materials explicitly discourage roads closures. The code is written to work in conjunction with the effort of Lake County to address these concerns that are currently existing within our community. And Bryce, I'll hand a few off to you.
Okay. So question 5, the Planning Commission was applauded for their efforts in finding and honoring a way for property owners to utilize their properties in a way that hasn't been allowed previously. And that's where that backcountry structure permit comes along. So yeah, backcountry structures do require planning, construction standards, and environmental review, but up to this point, they are currently not an allowed use. What was the matrix for determining the boundary? We kind of went through this, but just, have a certain set of environmental concerns, historic use, and and rural and remote access. Following that public land survey system boundaries of townships and sections, we established, like parcels that were not within the industrial mining zone. The boundary took into consideration sections of land and private holdings within those public lands. And it's important to point out that this zoning does not apply to the underlying public land or the interspersed public land. This proposal does not include that public land, and it's not our jurisdiction. The land within the boundary, they all share those common elements, right? The accessibility, proximity, and interspersement with public land, and the environmental concerns. The public had concerns regarding the tax and value impact that the zoning will have on their property. This is a bit of a two-sided conversation, as some would prefer to realize higher property values and some would rather realize lower values. The truth is that the market demand will dictate what happens to the property values and tax assessments, and that is a state-run process that has very little to do with zoning and more just with market values as they come out. And how did the backcountry zone proposal decide on a limit of 900 square feet for residential single-family homes? So this was one, it was a conversation that had a lot of back and forth. We kind of settled on 900 square feet because we wanted to minimize the impacts and potential of those big mansions out in the backcountry while also kind of allowing a reasonable use. Seeing that the current single-family threshold is 600 square feet, we just thought it made sense to add 50% of that additional floor area for 900 square feet. A single-family home, just to clarify, is one that includes a kitchen, separate bathrooms, sleeping rooms, and living spaces. So different than the backcountry zone structures. Barriers you're going to find to building these seasonal homes are seasonal access, limited emergency access, inability to obtain proper or property or hazard insurance, and inability to finance. However, the square footage size and these things are something we'd like to have a discussion about and are open to review. Want me to keep going? Okay. Can I use an RV as a backcountry structure? No, an RV is considered a temporary camping vehicle that can be used to camp on the land for an allotted time frame, while a backcountry structure must be attached to the ground and go through that permitting process. What type of variants for sanitary wastes are appropriate? Limited use OWTS, on-site wastewater treatment systems, include vaults or vaulted or pit privies. Structures built without plumbing or hauling or hand carrying their primary source of water are the primary users of these variant OWTS systems. These methods of alternative sanitary waste are reviewed and considered for approval by the Lake County Board of Health. It is important to research alternatives along with the wealth of information located on the public health web page about this stuff. And can I be included in the rezone? The current proposed boundary has been established. However, rezoning is an application available to any property owner who can qualify under certain criteria. Typically, you must either be adjacent to a BCZ parcel or have the minimum required acreage. And that's a question you can direct to building and land use and they'd be able to answer further. And the final one, the backcountry zone needs to consider what happens if a backcountry structure or area is allowed to become a safety hazard. This was a great comment and taken to heart. The intent is to provide property owners with a use that doesn't currently exist, but properties should not be allowed to become a detriment or danger to the adjacent properties or the natural environment. The code includes enforcement and compliance measures, which provides a revocation hearing process that gives both Lake County and the property owner an opportunity to address any non-compliant matters.
Thank you, Bryce. I think that's the end of our presentation. Hopefully that clarifies a few things for folks. At this time, I will go ahead and open it up for some questions and comments. The first part of this, I would like to start with Planning Commission and County Commissioners. If anybody would like to start with any questions or comments on tonight's topic. And I may have a hard time seeing folks, so if you want to just do the raise hand reaction, I think that would be the most helpful. And also, if we have none, we can move on to public comment. Jamie Seiffer, go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. I just had a quick question about the boundaries. It looks like some of the parcels are split on the boundary. And I can't really tell, but I was just curious if somebody who drew the lines could speak to how we came to have it this way.
Yeah, I will let Bryce expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. There's really only a handful of parcels that are going to be split zoning because of this proposed backcountry zone. You have one that's near the north on Highway 24. That's just because it's a large parcel. You can kind of see it hanging out like a little blue snaggletooth on the west side of that, Mount Zion parcel. And so that's just kind of a large parcel. We wanted to include, that parcel covers multiple ecosystems, right? So it goes from meadow into more of a patented mining claim, forested hillside type environment. There's one other towards Sugarloaf that was split just because that was a tough split between the ag forestry and the recreational zoning. That one was tough because there's just some pre-existing development. The ones that's really interesting, the ones you see the most that are being split are to, the south and east of Leadville. Those ones are actually currently split. So they're split between industrial mining and ag forestry as it stands. And they will remain split until we decide what to do with the ones that hang over into industrial mining, but we're not touching those for now. There's one in Granite, and that one is because it hugs the Arkansas River and then also goes into Chaffee County. And there are two on Perry Peak. And those two have kind of been partially included just to keep on section and township lines. And we've talked to the owner about that. And actually it was a owner request to be included.
Commissioner Mudge, you are next.
Thanks, Heather. Can I get clarification on the process here? Is the board only expected to ask you questions during this period, or will we have some level of conversation with the Planning Commission after we hear public comment?
Yeah, I think the dialogue remains open typically for question and answers with us throughout that, and even after closing public comment, before the public hearing is closed. There's still, as most of our applications, there's still opportunity for further discussion and communication for sure.
Okay. I would just like to bring up and maybe talk through, and I presume we would get to it, that change in the 35-acre minimum. I had looked at this and really liked some of our counties, or looking at some other counties requiring a minimum to even consider a unit for development. So I like that change and also want to talk through it a little bit more. I do want to clarify the comments on the road closures, because I just think it's important to state that, of course, there are Forest Service systems, there are trails, and there are roads. And as we have seen through some previous conditional use permitting, some of those things were definitely distinguished only because they were brought up and called out in a certain request. So those things may very well happen. And it's usually just an education process, not necessarily a change in the status of what's documented for roads. I'd also like to make a point to say that the county closes roads seasonally. And so I'd love for us to be a little more careful with the nuances of how we talk about closing roads, because we do that. I mean, many counties do that, and we do that for safety reasons and access reasons and a number of reasons, depending on the season. So I just want to be careful that, you know, if there is a new use permitted, that does not mean that Public Works might change or that we would grant access, which I know has been said, but I think I think we need to be really careful about how we talk about that. And then, yeah, I wonder about the boundary following certain parcel lines, if we might be able to tackle that. And I also have some thoughts on maybe for after public comment on perhaps removing some areas to then kind of remove a single family home dwelling use, if that's more appropriate to summarize in the back with the backcountry intent, leaving it as more primitive.
Okay, and I apologize, I didn't write all of those down, but maybe if we, I don't know that waiting till, I think we can go through them. We may as well start it now. So the first one I remember was the 35-acre question, on expanding on that a little bit more.
Yeah. So when staff had said that the table of uses that got sent out with the staff report had a minimum of 3 acres for this, which started me thinking and realizing that I wasn't sure of the answers to, well, can you subdivide a mining claim? And that really terrified me, that we then would kind of allow actually triple potential density in these areas rather than prohibit them. So I talked to staff about what some other counties have in place, in that you need a collection of 35 acres to be granted permission to build a unit. They don't have to be contiguous acres. They don't have to be lot consolidated, sorry. But then there are covenants put on other parcels that are going towards this acreage total. I really like that idea. I think that meets our intent. And so I am trying to wrap my head around what I think is kind of a compromise suggestion of having now, if you were to make new parcels, which I don't see why that would happen. So I'm trying to think through how that 35-acre minimum actually gets to this density issue that I don't think we quite have our arms wrapped around, because all of these areas are really so different too. But if you take some of those areas that you're looking at with the large amount of clustered mining claims, do we really want, how could we limit potentially 80 plus primitive structures going up in an area, unless that is the Planning Commission's intent or our intent?
So I'm going to break that out into a couple of things, and I'll let others respond, but I just want to clarify a couple of things for everybody. Also, is the 3 acres was minimum lot size. It didn't have anything to do with whether you could build on it or not. It was minimum lot size. So our code for each of these zone districts has a minimum lot size, and then it has a minimum district size. And our minimum lot size that we were originally proposing with this was 3 acres to have a lot within the backcountry zone. And that was mostly because we noticed so many overlapping claims that actually currently are less than 10 acres. So we felt like 3 acres made sense. But when the subdivision question came up and things like that, we figured, well, if we make it so that the code says that every parcel that's included in the backcountry zone, if this passes, if it's included in there, it's already, grandfathered, if that's the word you want to use, as conforming at that time. It's just that any new opt into the zoning district would have a minimum lot size of 35 acres. So that's the lot size change that we proposed. So
that still doesn't actually correlate with whether or not you can put up a structure?
Correct. I mean, any new backcountry zoned parcel would have to be 35. And then Ann, what's the zone district size, minimum zone district size for backcountry?
160 acres.
I'm sorry, what?
160 acres.
160 acres. So to create a whole new zone district somewhere outside of one of these, you would need 160 acres. To add on to one of these, opt into any of these, which we think we pretty much have everything included, you would need at least 35 acres. But those, and that's true of our current zoning codes, are if it was an existing lot in that zone district, it doesn't deem it if it's if you have a smaller than our current minimum lot size lot in UR, for instance, but you've had it since before that lot size was created, that doesn't deem that lot not buildable. Somebody can still build on that lot. They just can't create a new one of that size or smaller, which would prevent anybody from taking, if there's a group of these claims that has a placer, for instance, that's 40 acres, it wouldn't allow them to put in a bunch of 3-acre lots, subdivide it into a bunch of 3-acre lots, because they wouldn't be able to create any new parcels that are less than 35 acres. So new parcels can be created after this were to go in effect. I understand the idea of so now I'll just move over to my own personal take, and I'll let it open up to everybody's conversation as far as commissioners and planning commission. But on the density piece, I think it would be my initial response that I think requiring somebody to have 35 acres to build a unit feels really close to a taking to me. I think I think that would be something I wouldn't probably support. I think there's enough obstacles. We've created enough criteria here for folks to have to go through, both on the single family dwelling side and the backcountry structure side, that it's going to limit. And quite honestly, a lot of this is geological, environmental hazards are going to deem a lot of these properties not able to have structures on them. I think that to me, that's taking it a step too far, but I will open it up for others to be part of that conversation.
I guess I personally don't see, even where there's a big clusters of mining claims, I think just given the process we built in, I don't see a crazy rush of development or a lot of density. And in that Empire Gulch area, a lot of that land is actually under conservation easement already. You have a lot of cliffside, above tree line type stuff up there. You go to Weston Pass, a lot of that is, above tree line. There's a lot of concerns, I think, that would take care of the problem of too many houses being up there, especially with given the current protections that are already, not to do with zoning, but that are already there on that land.
Other planning commission or county commissioners have any thoughts, please, to weigh in on that?
I don't know if Anne would be willing to just, what does the geological hazards review entail, or
Sure. So if they're, everything, we want to do everything site specific. And I think if they're listed out in the code as, areas that might have landslides, unstable soils, that might have avalanche concerns, there's just a whole list of things that are specifically called out within the code language of examples of, areas of concern. Maybe it's mining, maybe it's, so whatever on a case by case site specific basis would be, the call for a greater degree of review prior to being able to obtain an entitlement on the property.
and then that still would come to the planning commission through that site plan review process too.
Yes, it would. So that would be part, just like the site plan review process for commercial development, scenic conservation overlay, or multifamily. All attributes of the site and all that investigation. So just like with any other land use application, we refer out to those experts in those areas of concern, and they report back to us. It might also result in the property owner having to conduct a geohazard investigation of the property to bring forward that information. So the Planning Commission would have a wealth of information in order to make a determination on the final site plan. So just like with the site plan review on any parcel right now, in order to issue a building permit, we have to ensure what the building envelope is, what attributes might be indicative to that specific site, and we have to look to mitigate them or keep the development from any impacts to or from any of those hazards. So it would, when the site plan review process is administered and brought to the Planning Commission, all of that information would be brought forth in order to make a decision on what the buildable space of a parcel would be.
Yeah, that, I mean, I agree with Bryce in that regard. Like, it feels like there's quite a few check-in points on some of these. Yeah, before things would actually be in the ground. So thank you, Ann.
Hey, this is Tritz. This question goes to Bryce. Bryce, you did a great job on drawing all this out in the backcountry, and commend you for that and everything that you've done on that. But maybe you, for a more explanation to the public, you could describe, say a fella has a 10-acre claim. Most of the claims are 10.33 acres. He's got a 10.33 acre within that 35 boundary. How many structures could he build? You got to get off.
If he had one 10-acre claim,
Right, one 10-acre.
one structure.
Exactly. Okay. That it was clear to me, but I thought maybe there's some confusion there.
Commissioner Fiedler, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to follow up on this. I guess, yeah, and actually following up on that. So my understanding from looking at this map in preparation for this is, yeah, most of these parcels are 10 acres and up. And to me, if I'm sort of coming back to Commissioner Mudge's sort of questions, I mean, the concern is that those are the parcels that will be sort of in effect grandfathered in at that less than 35 acre size. And to my mind, or thinking anyway, the concern is if there's a large, well, you know, a significant grouping of 10 acre claims or lower in one of these areas on the map, then you run that risk of sort of some hillside looking more like a subdivision in the backcountry, which is, I think, sort of in layman's terms, like the intent of this backcountry zone is to sort of try to avoid, you know, so many structures clustered together that it doesn't look like the backcountry anymore. So I guess I think the question maybe for Bryce as sort of the mapping expert is like, do we have a sense of where those clusters of sort of significantly less than 35 acre parcels are? Like, is there a particular area in here where there are a lot of 10 or 5 acre parcels? While you think of that question, I threw at you blind. I mean, you know, like looking up to the north, out between 91 and 24 to the north, things are pretty spread out there. But then, you know, there's much denser clusters in one or, you know, like to the south of the east side IM zone, you know, out above kind of like the fish hatchery, if you will. You know, there are a couple areas that just visually to me from the high level map seem like there could be clusters, but do you know, or can you try to help us understand where are the threat areas of allowing some of these grandfathered in smaller parcels?
So there's a few areas where there's definitely clusters, but I would caution you is that this map can kind of be deceptive because, like I was saying, these pieces of land were laid out according to minerals, not according to terrain or anything like that. So even that big cluster we have south of the industrial mining district, those are on Long and Dairy Hill. And a lot of those have significant slopes that are above and beyond what we would allow anyways. South of that, you see another cluster. A lot of that is in the Paddock wildlife area. So it's under conservation easement perpetually. You go a little bit to the east along the mountain, that's all cliffside, kind of the mosquitoes. So I would say that there's quite a bit of claims that would be eligible to develop there in the Mosquito Empire area, but maybe not as much as that cluster is leading you to believe once the actual feasibility of building comes down. That same goes for all the southern stuff on the southern side of the county. That stuff on Perry Peak, I would be very surprised if anyone was able to meet the standards to build anything in any of those parcels. I'd say like the biggest areas though, current zoning, you have Sugarloaf Mountain. That's a lot of small clustered claims that are all, at one time that was planned to be a subdivision, I believe, before other things came along. And then you have the St. Keevan area, where I think the St. Keevan area, you have a lot of clusters, but there's a lot of interesting things going on there terrain wise, but also with geologic hazards. There's a lot of existing waste tunnels and sites like that might prevent clustered development. So I would say that St. Keevan's, Sugarloaf, and Mosquito are definitely just visually have the most of the clustered, private land. But I don't know, just anecdotally knowing the geologic issues I know going on there, I can't see like clustered development really.
Right, thanks. And if I could ask maybe to staff or just to follow up, just to make sure I have the understanding 100% right. So the changes that were proposed to have that 35-acre standard going forward. So small parcels smaller than 35 that currently exist are in effect grandfathered in. It's up to meet the standards, but to actually build, but it's future subdivision below 35 is what's being prevented by the way the proposed standard is written, right?
That's correct, Jeff. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That was it for me for now.
Okay, I don't have any other hands raised. Was there any other thoughts from our planning commission members or county commissioners?
Well, I had a couple others, so I wanted to let this particular topic. The other thing, sort of thinking about ways to avoid, really sort of like, to some extent, scenic impact and environmental impact. Is there a sense of where does like tree line fall? I'm just thinking of, where we would like to avoid lots of structures that are highly visible from other recreation areas or from roads in town. Do we have a sense of, and also I'm curious if it's possible to write in sort of like an elevation standard, or again, with the intent to sort of avoid swaths of development above tree line, which is also more fragile areas.
And I don't know if you wanted to take that. I think some of it's included in our site plan review, but I'll let Ann expand on that.
Absolutely. So the standards that are outlined within the site review process address specifically, Jeff, some of those concerns. And so elevating this to a planning commission and a public hearing process, along with engagement with stakeholders, specifically looking at alpine tundra concerns, visibility, all of those attributes are covered within the standards. And so it is, similar to the scenic conservation overlay process site plan review that I know you're familiar with. It's, that same kind of looking. One of the finding is of the site plan is that it has to be harmonious to the surrounding area. And so there will be a concern about the aesthetic quality, as well as all of the other items that you mentioned. So that is a finding that has to be made coming out of the site plan review process.
Commissioner Mudge.
I wonder, I heard from the assessor's office at one point that there was and I know, I think you covered it earlier in the slope, like no more than 16 degrees or 30, can't, 30% slope. Has there ever been something that said, anything at a certain elevation or in the tundra? And is that possible that we can just set that in the expectations outright? Because that concerns me as well.
Anne, you're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself. There isn't, I think that the code was specifically written to allow for some interpretation and some case by case basis. But if there is a straight across the board standard, I do think that, something could be incorporated in there to set the expectation. But I do think that it's within the general information and criteria and review process. But if it would desire the Planning Commission and the board to come up with something more specific, that could be achieved.
Yeah, we could, go into a little bit more detail on that. I think that if I remember correctly, Ian, I think the plan was that for any application information that's given out to folks, should this pass, for any kind of construction of any type, there would be some pretty good information with our intent statement, as well as another very firm disclosure on roads and maybe closed seasonally or not changing access, all that fun stuff. And then in that, in some of that descriptive, I think we could easily include something that your site plan review is going to review these things, and things that are built in those more tundra above tree line areas, have a good chance of not being approved. And I guess the only other thing I want to point out is I think that the proposal right now is a huge step, I think, forward towards protecting those areas. And should we start to see, I would be incredibly surprised if, in 2 years, we all of a sudden saw 20 houses in one area on one hillside. But if we started to see that it was becoming a problem, I feel like this code has been written in such a way that it can be easily modified over time to address any issues that come up. I think we can, I think like Bryce said, I think the map is deceiving because it looks like a lot of them are very close together, but there's still 10-acre parcels, and 10 acres is a lot of space. And there's a lot of topography involved in those current maps that aren't, or in the actual landscape that aren't accurately portrayed on the map. So I think that's just something else to think about. Lupe, you have your hand raised.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Lynn. I just wanted to pose with the subject that we're talking about, backcountry zone structures that are potentially folks want to build out there. And one thing I wanted to pose a question is how do we know if people want to start building structures out there? How do we know? Do we have data that if folks are having these permits and they want to start creating these backcountry zone structures? And also with current code right now, Chairwoman Lynn, and also Anna, I think you could talk a little bit more about it, but what is our current code, right? Like right now, our current code, people could build bigger structures, right? And then you could build single family homes out there. And so with this could help mitigate the situation, and all could also, like, with our intent, right? Like it could, so we could preserve that natural area. And so that's one thing that I wanted to point out, like that clarification, right? Like our current code allows it, whereas now we're creating more of a structure and also that preservation piece, right?
Correct. So the current zone district that these claims live underneath, if somebody then now the one thing they wouldn't be allowed to do currently is do the lesser build, the under 600 square foot, 600 square foot or less backcountry structure, but they could do a single family dwelling of 600 square foot or greater with no maximum. And so each one of these little 10-acre mining claims can have a 4,000 square foot house on it if so deemed. So that's currently how our zoning is, and this would, our proposal here would address it so that, yes, we would allow some smaller builds, but keep in mind that if, a few 10-acre parcels put a 600 square foot backcountry structure on it, that's going to be far less impactful than, a few thousand square foot home. The proposal says that single family dwellings have to be at least 600 square feet, but a maximum of 900 square feet is what's currently proposed. So if that clarifies it just a touch. Commissioner Mudge, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so yes. See, the way I was looking at it is that they are allowed to build that, but they have to meet the International Residential Code. And they can't because of the nature of where they are and not being able to get utilities or water. So there is an inherent restriction right now. And I think that's where I'm struggling with, one, including a residential dwelling unit in this backcountry zone where there are some outlying areas that might not necessarily fit that. If we could, and particularly, I think the Beaver Lakes Estates area right along the IM, like this is accessible. This is a place where people have single family homes. Why, my question really, why include that area in this backcountry zone? Up 52, which you can't see on the map, and I think our GIS map is better to kind of talk through this stuff a little bit, but this collection of, you can't really differentiate it below Beaver Lakes Estates here, but County Road 52 is not plowed. There might be one year-round resident up there that snowmobiles in. And so if in my head we remove Beaver Lakes Estates because that's a place where there are a lot of year-round residents, then that makes this concept of setting, like thinking about just a backcountry dwelling or primitive dwelling a little easier rather than incorporating the year-round residential option.
Sorry to clarify, so you're saying you'd like to see more density there?
There already is a lot of density. I don't think it necessarily fits to include it in the backcountry zone because there's such that there is a lot of density there already. There are year-round homes in that area already. I guess I don't know why it would be. I don't know. It's a lot easier for me to think about not including the single family dwelling in the backcountry and not confusing kind of different areas. And I mean, all of these zones could really be looked at. They all are very different. It's already difficult to really apply that.
Yeah, and I guess that would be where I would, just to clarify on the boundary again, is why there is this boundary is because Beaver Lakes Estates was patented mining claims that then went through the subdivision process and that became a neighborhood. The boundary outside of that are all still patented mining claims that never went through that process and are still kind of have those same characteristics. just to let you know why Beaver Lakes was excluded, but the things next to it were included.
And I
And
guess
then-
I would say that the comment of the current zone district allowing single family dwellings, but they can't do it, I don't think that's accurate. I think if your pockets are deep enough, and there have been several inquiries with people whose pockets are deep enough, they can absolutely overcome all of those obstacles. I mean, maybe they wouldn't get approved for something above tree line, but most of these areas that we're talking about here, where we're concerned about a single family dwelling, they absolutely can do that. And if 3 of their closest neighbors have the same amount of money, they're going to upgrade, they're going to fight to upgrade roads. They're going to do that utility infrastructure. I mean, there's multi-million-dollar homes in Summit County that are on solar. They don't need power. They would all buy a well truck, or, hire a well truck to come up and install their well and their septic, and bam, that's all they need. So there's not, who it's not affordable for are the people who are going to build the 1,000 square foot single family dwelling. So the only you're correct in that it's not affordable for the typical user that I think we are targeting with this proposal. And I guess I feel like single family dwellings under 900 square feet are pretty, I mean, I don't know, I feel like that's a pretty restrictive use, but then it allows there to be more substantial codes to meet in order to have that type of structure. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, there are only a certain amount of places that you could still meet those requirements, I think. I just thought of Lupe's original question of how do we know, like, do we know that there's a demand or the desire for this? And what I think about is all of what I consider pretty inappropriate promotion of sales of mining claims from outside folks, it seems, who are selling mining claims as potential second home sites. That's kind of what comes to the forefront of my mind in trying to address this issue. And I don't know whether this, I mean, and those people still have to go through a process, and maybe this is not where we can really affect that, but I just worry that we're going to still see that with a lot of this, and have a lot of development, but.
Does anybody else have any more? We can come back to this discussion too after we go through some public comment. I'm sure there's some public that has some things that they'd like to weigh in that as well. But any other comments on this subject matter from planning commissioners or county commissioners before we move on to the next one? Okay. Sarah, what was your next question and or comment?
I think I just made a comment about talking about roads and road closures that are seasonal, that are, are the current practice of the county. And then I think with Lupe's question, segued into kind of the thought of perhaps removing an area like Beaver Lakes from the boundary where there's a lot of year-round residents units already. And then the boundary following parcel lines was another one, but not a critical conversation at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Any other thoughts and or questions to discuss before we open it up to public comment? Okay. And you, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I'm sorry. I did have a kind of a big question, I guess, about the commercial uses, because we have in our kind of our preamble to that it's, you know, allowing for primitive rather than commercial use, but then we have a couple of things allowed by conditional use permitting, which may be one of the, you know, I definitely, I kind of feel at the moment that like allowing a resort is something that we could easily remove from, like that is not intended in this zone, and that is currently included. So I would love some thinking out loud on that.
So the problem has been that and this is a future task for the Planning Commission to tackle, but unfortunately our use table is lacking some use types. And the way that our code is written is that if your use type isn't specifically specified in the use table, you find the closest. Things like the Weston Pass huts, some of those other backcountry cabins have fallen under either private guest resort or private camps, and can speak more to that. But that was the idea. And the idea was that because we had all this criteria under backcountry zone and we had the conditional use permit process to go through, that it would have to be something that made sense for it to fit within there, but that things like the Weston Pass huts, or even, and this isn't applicable because they are on Forest Service land, but like Tennessee Pass Cookhouse, you know, if any of those were to come to us today, I think we would all say that those still fit within the backcountry reasonably, and we would probably approve their conditional use permit. If somebody comes in and wants to put in, you know, a full resort getaway with a swimming pool and whatever, we're going to say, nope, that's not consistent with the backcountry zone. So I think that was our idea with that, is that unfortunately our use table isn't very specific, or it is specific, but sometimes not in the right specific ways to Lake County. That most of those have had to fall under those couple of categories, which is why we kept them. They're currently conditional use allowed in their current zone, so we kept them in this one, in the proposal here. I think obviously we can continue discussing that, but that just to give you a little bit of background as to how that discussion moved that forward.
You know, I just have a quick comment because I totally agree with where you're coming from, Heather, where like the resort doesn't seem to be in line with the intent, but I think the vagueness of the language leads it to being included, but also just, I don't know if we want to prevent things, even if we can't think of, like, I'm thinking of maybe there's a future use that'll come along that fits with the resort that we can't even think of right now. Like someone wants to make a multi-million-dollar glamping resort where you hike in for Swedish rock massages or whatever, like things we don't even know of that we might not be able to think of now. I think we want to be able to leave those possibilities for people to be creative in the future.
But to that effect, yes, I think that's absolutely the thing we don't. And I guess when I think of that, like I'm thinking of these high alpine areas where we don't want that kind of development. So, but I guess it's all site specific, and we'd have to rely pretty heavily on the confidence of the Planning Commission and the board to make those decisions.
Any other comments on that or further from Planning Commission or County Commissioners before I move to public comment? Okay, and Anne, have people been able to direct chat you if they want to be on the list for public comment or no? I couldn't remember because I know we closed chat, but I didn't know if they could message you. No. Okay, so what we'll have to do is do this with hands raised. Oh, go ahead, Anne.
Actually, hands raised is great. I just don't have any messages. I don't have any chats from anyone.
Okay, Hand raised is fine, but again, I'm just going to reiterate that I really need everybody's name to show your full first and last name on your Zoom. And if you don't know how to do that, if you hover over your little picture box and you go to the top right corner with the 3 little dots, you can rename yourself there. Please do that. And then as well, when I call on you, I'll have you state your first and last name again, and then you can.
No, did we lose Heather?
I think we may have temporarily, and it sounded like she was, oh, there she is.
I'm back. Sorry, I keep, my internet may not be super stable. So Bryce, you'll have to be my backup if I drop off again. I don't know, hopefully that was all legible, what I asked from folks. But I see one hand raised from a John Fasano. And go ahead, please.
Hey, thank you very much. First of all, I think that this is a really forward-thinking proposal. I own a alpine hut at 11,600 feet in Colorado. It's zoned residential, and it was a royal PETA to develop. It is in sort of the smaller category. It's definitely not a multi-million-dollar house, and so I think this is a tremendous opportunity for recreation and access in a safe, sustainable, and a way that in line with the goals of the county. Also, when you guys were talking about conditional use permits, I just wanted to advocate that I think there's tremendous opportunity for Leadville to have environmentally friendly, safe usage like the Weston Pass huts and hut systems in Colorado are amazing recreation opportunities that are so unique here. So thank you for including that in the proposal so far. I think that's really interesting. I was curious as to like what happens with currently zoned residential houses. And by way of example, Commissioner Mudge, the person that you mentioned who lives on 52 year round, I think his place is for sale right now. It looks like if you were to classify it today, it would probably be more like a backcountry zoning. But like, I guess one of my questions is what happens to that if this zoning passes and a property like that changes hands and somebody needs to redevelop? Does it fall under the old code, or is it the new code, or how does that work? I don't know if this is a Q&A, so I'm just throwing it out there as a question. And, I think I was also curious as to like, what's the timeline for implementing something like this? If it were to pass this year, does that mean it goes into effect next year? Does it go into effect immediately? There's a lot of properties that have been for sale in these areas right now. And, they're certainly being advertised as, hey, build in the new backcountry zoning that might be passing. And I think it's sort of hard to make good decisions right now, given the limbo of the status. So I think 2 questions.
Yeah,
there.
thank you. Those are great questions. Yep. So first question on the implementation, I think the goal would be that it would be immediately put forward, but that would all be up to Lake County staff. So Ann might be the one to better answer that question, but I think the intent was that if this were to pass, and just to be clear again, this process here is the county planning and zoning would make their recommendation for either approval or denial to the county commissioners, and then they will be the decision-making body at their next public hearing or their next commissioner meeting. So if it were to pass, then I think the idea or the intent would be to implement it as soon as possible, not a year from now. And I'm sorry, what was your first question again? I should have wrote it down.
Thank you for answering that. The first question is like, what happens to, there's a property for sale right now that's zoned residential. It doesn't really look like a residential property. If this were to pass and then that were to change hands, like what are the implications for a new owner of that property?
And I'll let Ann answer that because we have that grandfather situation that happens all the time in different zone districts. So I'll let Ann answer that.
Thank you.
Also, John, that's what we call a legal non-conforming use. So legal non-conforming uses can continue in perpetuity. They just can't increase in degree, size, or intent. without coming under the code, but you are still allowed to maintain that structure, utilize that structure in the same manner that it was originally permitted. That is, as long as it is a legally permitted structure.
Thank you.
I have a hand up from Natalie Lord.
Hey everybody. So we have one of those less than 10 acre lots that's proposed to be rezoned. And our major concern is definitely the square footage size. We had originally, or in the works of planning, our single family home that would put the residence above our garage, which would put it into the hillside. And obviously 1,200 square feet, or I think 1,200 was in the comments from the last meeting. That was the new consideration. 900 is definitely not going to work, and 1,200 would be hard to do with what we're hoping. So I would just implore all the commissioners to maybe remove the square footage limitation and do the site plan review, case by case basis, because our property does currently have power to the corner. So we do have some of those utilities that some of these other parcels don't have. For the most part, we're in favor of this backcountry zoning, because we want to be in an area that conserves the environment and the natural landscape and whatnot. So I am an architect. I have a lot of really exciting plans of how to minimize the look of our house, so you wouldn't actually see it from anywhere. It's tucked back in the mountain. So I really think the square footage limitation is our biggest challenge and our biggest concern, because it definitely changes our plans for our property. That's it.
Thank you, Natalie. Do I have any other, if you would like to speak, you'll just want to do a raise hand. And you'll do that through the reactions button on the bottom of your screen. Okay, I have a hand up from Gail McDonald.
Can you hear me? Hi, everyone.
I can, yes, we can.
Thank you for taking the time to go through all this. Couple of things. I guess we sent in a letter with some of our concerns, and I haven't heard if you have any other written letters of public comment back to the planning and zoning and county commissioners. But just to recap on a couple of those items, we happen to have property up by Ski Cooper, which is more of a resort location. And that's now falling within your new backcountry zoning district. We have currently a CUP that where we are operating some commercial operations. So I guess I want to know, how does that really affect us, and how does it affect Ski Cooper if they ever plan to expand further than just the back run or going off to the south or to the north? Because that's kind of all within that backcountry zoning district.
And I'm going to let you take that if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, Gail, I think this was very good timing coming out of that discussion of, being thoughtful of allowing commercial uses to come under the conditional use permit process. And specifically, I think that both of those potential expansions in the future, there is an opportunity within the new code language with the commercial uses that have been retained both through group camp and vacation lodge, as well as resort and guest ranches. So I do think that the zoning does support, and Gail, I will just mention that I did speak to your attorney, and he did say, since you would be present this evening, that he would let not to read your letter into public record because you would be present to make your own comments. So thank you so much for being here. But my thought is, as staff to the Planning Commission and the board, is that this is a good example of the conversation that was previously had about remaining to have some commercial uses available, and trying to, not discount that there are opportunities that we still need to be able to consider through a conditional use permit. So thank you, Gail.
Okay. I have one, I guess, two more questions, if that's all right, or comments. One is the other one was I agree with Nicole on the square footage cap. I think that should be something that the group reassesses and reevaluates, and just kind of, it comes under design and how you actually put a structure on the property. So to cap it and to minimize it seems like you kind of not looking at it as a case by case. The second one would be, should this all go through, how are you governing this? I mean, part of the backcountry zoning overlaps with US Forest Service and also BLM. So we can call it backcountry, but we still have numerous people walking through all of the properties. And so how are you going to start kind of protecting the private property owners and also the community, and how do we stop from all the pop-up tents that go in? I mean, we can say we have to have a designated campsite, but we all know that's not happening. So how are we now going to manage the zoning districts?
Gail, I'm going to go ahead. I think Heather might have some compromised internet for just a moment. So I would just talk about the compliance and regulation associated with this use. And so within the code language, there is a pretty swift opportunity to bring these structures under compliance if we receive complaints. If we receive a complaint, there is a due process built into the code that is a revocation hearing that goes directly to the Board of County Commissioners. It is a quasi-judicial setting in which all of the evidence is brought forward, and the board can render a decision which can result in the revocation of their certificate of completion and ability to occupy the structure. There is, of course, a cure process in there as well. Once we've identified what those unsatisfactory conditions are, or the findings of the board, there is the ability to cure said non-compliance. And so that is built in to the code language. Knowing that to be able to get to a backcountry structure permit, you have had to go through a site plan, a public vetted process to review the land. You've had to hire a third-party inspector to conduct your inspections on site. There is going to be, you've had to go through and hire an engineer to do an alternative, a limited use sanitary alternative. There is a lot of hoops to jump through. So these are not uses that are going to be allowed to be applied to the lands that haven't had to go through a considerable amount of review and work on the property owner's part. So there is an investment to be able to move forward with issues as well.
Thank you, Anne. I have a hand raised by Henning Olson.
Yes, thank you. My name is Henning Olson. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thanks for everyone that have been working on this. I own a 10-acre mining claim within the proposed zone. And I kind of just wanted to share with this group the reason why I felt that I wanted to buy that a while back. And that was because I wanted to build a small little something to be able to get out and enjoy the nature, enjoy the beauty we have in Lake County. And as I got more into it, I realized that I had to build, that I had to put in a well, a septic, I had to put in a bathroom, I had to put in a kitchen. If I wanted all of these, amenities, I would have stayed in, I would have bought a house in a suburb, or, where I can have my home theater and sort of hot tub. That's not what I'm looking for. So I think that this backcountry zoning and the structure which potentially would allow me to build something much more simple, is spot on. I think a lot of the sort of structure that you put around it in terms of the site and making sure that the impact is low, I think that's also spot on. I think it strikes a good balance between sustainability and maintaining, the current environment, while still allowing property owners like myself to be able to use my property and then, get out into the background and sort of enjoy it. So I think I sort of fully support this. I think this is a great addition to the code. I think I also would sympathize with some of the previous speakers that have mentioned the square footage cap. I don't think it'll impact me, but I can see how that can be limiting for someone that may currently own property, that it could potentially be pretty restrictive. So I can sympathize with them. No questions on my end, I guess. I just wanted to kind of leave that comment, and thank you all.
Thank you, Henning. Next, I have Todd Hennis, please.
Hi, this is Todd Hennis of Salem Minerals and WEPA Holdings. I own, through those entities, parcels throughout these areas. And I want to acknowledge the fact that the Planning Commission took into account comments on the historical mining use of all these properties. Every single one of them was established as a mining claim and proved to the federal government that they were economic to mine when they were established. In the future, as we go through the matrix of allowed uses on the planning department's pages, we're going to be seeing a C for mining under the backcountry. Nothing will really change. Hello?
I'll go ahead and answer that just in
Yeah.
case there is. Yes, we did take into account your comments, Todd, excuse me, and we have amended the table of uses to include conditional just like it was previously.
Okay, because yeah, I dread walking into the planning department and being told, oh no, this is backcountry, it's special, which you will be told anyways, but we recognize that. On the buildings question, because mining is regulated by the state and you do need some surface buildings temporarily for the mining use, it's going to be over the 900 square feet no matter what happens, because you have to have minimum sanitary facilities, change room for the workers, support buildings, et cetera, that will all be reclaimed at the end of this. How will that be handled?
I'm going to take the liberty of answering that as well, since I've done a lot of mining permits for Lake County. And those are things that come under your conditional use permit. So when you have a conditional use permit for a use that comes to the Planning Commission and Board for approval, if you are approved through Lake County, then those are just the intricacies relative to your conditional use permit, and you're not held to the other use by right standards.
Okay, one final comment, and this is going to Bryce's comments about being creative, and also to Gail McDonald's comment on Ski Cooper. Yeah, I own land right by the Silverton Mountain ski area in San Juan County. And that's a single lift. It has 2 seat chairs. It's minimal. that sort of commercial activity as a conditional use, I think should actually be encouraged in the county from an economic standpoint and can be done in a sensitive manner. That's all I have.
Thank you, Todd. Next, I have AJ, and if you can please let us know your full first and last name, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, this is AJ Morris. Hey, to concur with everybody on the square footage usage, I'd like to see that raised. Have we thought about the minimum square footage on these?
So the minimum square footage for single family dwelling is 600 square feet as it is currently. So that remains the same. And then the backcountry structure would be anything up to 600 square feet.
Up to 900 square feet.
Well, backcountry structure will be 0 to 600 square feet, and then single family dwelling would be 600 to 900 square feet as it's currently proposed.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm just kind of thinking about a bunch of tough sheds up there. You know, people building these little bitty structures, but not building these mansions like you want. I would like to see the backcountry square footage raised a little higher than 600, my opinion. And on these third-party inspectors, do we have a list of people, or how do we go about getting third-party inspectors?
Heather, would you like me to take that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So AJ, we will be looking for someone, a lot of times, you know, an engineer that's willing to go up and look at the inspections of that's happening already in the county for alternative builds, or anybody that holds like an ICC certificate in inspection. So yes, we will need to be sharing resources of people that will be willing to come up and do those inspections. I do think that Shooms Coda, our current building inspector, even Jerry Long, will consider doing them if time allows. So we can build that resource base as we find those folks.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised, so I just want to ask out there. I, again, just want to reiterate that I appreciate everybody's participation in attending the meeting. We appreciate the feedback for sure. Any other comments from public? I have Kevin Pokerny.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, this is Kevin Pokorny. I just wanted to echo what Henning Olson said. I've been following this project for 6-7 years now. Also bought, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I also bought property prematurely, and I hope to build a backcountry structure. It cut out, I'm not sure what was being talked about, including County Road 52 in the backcountry zone. I'm not sure if that's what we were talking about. That's where my property is, and I would like to include County Road 52 if that was under discussion. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. AJ, your hand is still raised, but I don't know if you had a new comment or if that was just from before.
Sorry, I'm a boomer, not a zoomer.
That's okay. It took us all a while. To lower it, you just do the same way you raised it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Pat McDonald.
All right. Can you hear me now? I'm the same. Boomer, not a zoomer. That's great. I was wondering if there would be a process for case-by-case increase in the square footage requirement. I mean, seems to me like that is very low in a lot of instances for both the backcountry structure and for a single family home if you're doing it. I know in our case, we've got 40 acres there, and a 900 square foot single family home on 40 acres is tiny, and I don't think would be hardly usable as a single family. But I understand there may be situations where that's as big as people would want, or maybe as big as would fit on the property, depending on topography kind of stuff. And then also I was wondering, with our property adjacent to Ski Cooper, it seems to me like that's something that we really shouldn't be in this in the first place. It's a very different situation there than most of this backcountry stuff. We have the cookhouse and the sleep yurts and the Ski Cooper traffic all going through there already, and would certainly, from my standpoint, prefer not to be involved in this, although I understand a lot of people really like it and it's really beneficial. And overall, I think that's the case. I just mainly feel that our property shouldn't be involved in it. And you're talking about changing some of the property borders or some of the borders of the backcountry zone. I would think it'd be quite easy to take it out of there.
So, yeah, and I guess to elaborate a little bit more on that, is your perception that this new proposed zone would increase traffic through your area or decrease it?
I don't know that. I'm saying there's a lot of traffic there now. I'm not saying really that it would change the amount of traffic substantially, but the limitations on what we could do there certainly limits the possibilities for us to use this property the way I've been expecting for the last 30 years at some point, to maybe build a single family home on this, or possibly go with a more like a 10th Mountain hut type building that to replace the commercial yurts that we have on there at the moment with Ty Hall. None of that is definitely planned, but it's just something that's always been in my mind, and part of the reason that I've kept the property for more than 30 years.
Sure. And definitely, just to clarify, this proposal, would affect us, I mean, as it's written right now, would affect us a single family dwelling over 900 square feet, but any use similar to what you currently have out there commercial wise, like if the yurts were not there, but you proposed for them to be there after this backcountry zone, it would still be the same process you would go through with your current zoning, and that would be a conditional use permit to get that approval. And through that conditional use permit application, you would be applying for what you want yours to look like. And as Ann kind of mentioned earlier, to Todd Hennis, in a conditional use permit application, you're essentially asking for that different than single family dwelling use, because it's more commercial in nature, and therefore single family dwelling sizes don't apply if you're using it on the commercial type use. So I just want to clarify that a little bit, that your current operation out there or something similar to it is the exact same process, whether it's backcountry zoning or its current zoning situation. But your concern with the single family dwelling restrictions would be different with the backcountry zoning.
And would there be a process to appeal that square footage, or is this something that's going to be set in stone, that if you've got I mean, there we have very good access, and we could very conceivably want to have more square footage. I just don't think that's enough square footage for a single family home. And certainly it's enough. People live in much smaller stuff, but on 40 acres, it just doesn't make sense to me for it to be restricted that small. I certainly understand the site type of issues and fitting in with the terrain and that kind of thing, and would abide by that kind of stuff, even if there weren't regulations for it. But I just feel the square footage is too small to be a maximum type hard number.
So the way that we have it, the way that it's being currently proposed, if it were to pass, it would pass with 900 square foot, and there wouldn't necessarily be an appeal process or permit process to do anything bigger. I will say that we have, the Planning Commission has, both in the town hall as well as this evening, heard numerous comments in favor of increasing that minimum square footage number. So I think that that is still a conversation, topic conversation for this evening for the Planning Commission to consider whether we would want to propose to adjust that. But to answer your question, the way it's proposed tonight, whatever number, if it were to pass, whatever number was agreed upon tonight would be the number, without there being, you know, an appeals or a opt-out process, really, if that makes sense.
Okay. One other quick thing, is this the final chance at public input for this thing, or is there something else? I know there was a meeting in early December that I got a notice about. The meeting actually came in the mail the day of the meeting. And I know there's mentioned that for 10 years, this kind of process has been ongoing, but it's first that I've ever heard of it.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, as far as public hearing, formal meetings, this is the joint public hearing process, for sure. The other meetings were all public, but they weren't necessarily noticed because we didn't have the final document. They were more work session type scenarios that we did have quite a bit of public still engaged with, but to answer your question, tonight would be, unless for some reason this moves into kind of a tabling or a extension discussion on the process, then in a normal scenario, if this is a recommendation for approval, whether it's with conditions or changes, the public hearing would close this evening, and then the county commissioners would vote on approval or denial of the application at their next meeting. But there wouldn't necessarily be another public hearing.
Okay, understand.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I don't see any other hands. Do I have any other folks that would like to speak? And that can include commissioners and planning commission at this point, because I don't see any hands raised.
I did want to speak. I have a question for Mr. McDonald. He is asking for an increase in square feet. I'm curious to know what he would think would be a proper maximum square foot for a house on 40 acres, for curiosity's sakes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's completely dependent on the site the house is on. I think they're in this backcountry kind of thing. Certainly there are places in counties surrounding Lake County anyway, where there are 10 and 20 and 30,000 square foot houses on 40 acres or smaller. But to me, in the location that we have, I guess is the only one I can speak to, I would think something in the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot area would be reasonable and be able to blend in with that topography and still look good there. and not be any kind of a burden on anybody for their sight lines or anything. It would fit there and nobody would see it. Unless you were on that property. Certainly there are places that are probably steeper or more exposed where that's probably true. Something smaller would take something smaller than that to be somewhat invisible. I guess invisible, not the right word, but something that would fit in would not be able to be that big. So I think it's very dependent on the site that you're putting the building on, and that's why it seems to me there should be some type of a case-by-case review of what that should be.
I think I just fear that we don't have the staff capability for that, unfortunately, but I think that it's definitely a good part of this further discussion that we'll have tonight. Ty Hall.
I just wanted to say, like with Pat McDonald, the way our, the cookhouse and the sleep yurts and the, we're on like 800 acres out there of, the ski resort permit plan, and then also with the Forest Service, but also being surrounded by Ski Cooper, and then with their new, backside expansion that they have going on, it really is changed a lot up there. And kind of like to Pat's point, it doesn't really fit this backcountry zoning part because of that. If you look at where Ski Cooper's new, boundaries go, where they can go, their new backside, I mean, it almost comes into where we already are. So we're surrounded with the ski resort, especially like I said, with the new backside stuff, and then all of our Nordic Center and Cookhouse now being under a new resort permit as well, butting up to Pat's land, it definitely would kind of make more sense to take that out of that backcountry, zoning area because of the extensive, commercial operation that's already occurring there.
Yeah, does anybody have any other thoughts on that? I think my initial thought was just that if we were to allow any commercial use in the backcountry, that's exactly what I think we would want it to look like, just based on our previous discussions. So I don't know that it doesn't fit, but again, I think open for continued conversation here. AJ has their hand raised next.
Yeah, this is AJ Morris. I think like what Pat was saying, don't make it such a hard line, make it to where those sites can be looked at. And if, like I can understand Pat's situation with the amount of acreage he has, and we have quite a bit of acreage in our area also. And I think that hard line, and it seems like every meeting the hard line just gets smaller and smaller and smaller with the square footage. So yeah, I'm in favor of not putting such a hard line on it and have it under review, or however you want to put it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Marcella.
Thanks, Heather. I just have a little bit of concern about the parcels that overlap both the backcountry zone and the east side industrial mining zone. And I do understand not fully having a solution for those yet, but I think those could potentially be the first parcels that we see any kind of attempted backcountry zone development on. And so I'm wondering how we go about that plan. with any potential development there, or does the IM completely restrict any sort of building on it that relates to the backcountry zone? And so then you would only have the ability to build on part of your parcel that lays in the backcountry zone, not on the other side of your parcel, correct?
Heather, I can answer that. So we have dual zone parcels in several different areas in Lake County because we follow section lines and not property lines. And that's very intentional because we can have two surveyors that can have a discrepancy on a property line. So traditionally, since you'll find zone districts are always delineated by township section range. Those section lines. So it is not unusual to have private parcels that are duly zoned. And so the way that we administer those dual zone situations in Lake County is that you may only use the portion of the property that would be in the backcountry zoning under the backcountry zoning. So the part of the parcel that's currently in the IM zone district is prohibited from any kind of residential use. So that is, you are only entitled to the portion of the parcel that is within the district entitlements. So that is, you will find that in codes in lots of different jurisdictions because of following section lines, not property lines.
Okay, that helps me out. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
AJ, is your hand still raised again, or is it? Okay. Commissioner Mudge.
I think the question about the square footage is interesting. And I am a big proponent to keep it small, though I think it also brings up that consideration again, like the big distinction between being allowed to build a residential or a single family home. You have to meet a lot of different criteria. And I think that it's really hard to compare those areas along 91 even, because they have great access potentially to then areas up 82. I'd be open to thinking about some sort of table and criteria if you wanted to meet a single family home, or if you could meet and intended to build a single family home unit. And as I say that out loud too, I'm wondering, does it matter then if, I guess in my head, I say that and I think year-round dwelling and this is your home, but that's not necessarily what we talk about. That's not necessarily what a single family dwelling is. And do we need to make a distinction between that? Sorry, not really a question or a solution, just an observation.
Yeah, I don't know if we can, right? Because I think, and Anne might know more about this, but I feel like we've had this problem before with the conversation of second homeowners. And if somebody uses their house as a primary and then sells it to somebody who wants to use it as a secondary, are we somehow making that illegal? I don't think that we can. So I'm not sure that we can go into delineation of primary use versus secondary use. I don't know if that's a road we want to try to go down. I do feel like, and Bryce, if you want to speak a little bit more about some of those properties like 91, I feel like we've vetted that pretty well to know that they don't have super easy access.
Yeah, the only ones with direct road access are the White Mountain, the one where the zip line is. All those other parcels that are around Highway 91, there realistically isn't any access. The ones on the west side of Highway 91, you'd have to take Mount Zion Road all the way up, but that's a pretty steep hillside there. On the other side though, there is road access to the Herder parcels.
Any other Comments? Questions?
I do have two comments that I received by mail that I'd like to read it to the record. If that's
Perfect.
all right. So I have a Mr. David Holden. Ms. Schneider, I wanted to thank you and your staff for, actually this should go to the Planning Commission and the board. I want to thank you for hosting the virtual call on December 13th, 2021 concerning the potential rezoning of several remote properties in Lake County, including the parcel of land referred to as the number 17243 WJ Bryan Claim number 2, owned by Maui Park Shores LLC. LLC member Steve Holden attended the virtual meeting and provided the other members of the LLC with a positive report on the purposes of the rezoning. Accordingly, please know that you have the support of the LLC in pursuing this rezoning effort, and most importantly, in your intent to preserve the very essence of what we all love about Lake County, its natural beauty and mountain lifestyle. Thank you for your service. Most importantly, have a very Merry Christmas and joyous New Year. So that was information's a little dated. Then I have a Mr. Jay Tucker. And I'm going to just read his conclusion because he has some just specifics within the code language itself that he wants to propose, but I think his conclusion sums it all up. Please consider families, and especially large families and families with children who wish to have children and children's friends stay in the cabin in the woods and to provide hot meals and warm beds for everyone. Therefore, I would ask for a 25% increase to 750 square feet for a backcountry structure and suitable allowance to prepare and serve hot meals to hungry people looking for a peaceful place to gather and commune with nature. I have been advised that these comments will be read into the record at the hearing.
Great. Was that that was the last one? Cool. So we have a couple of things on the table for discussion. We have two kind of on both ends of the spectrum. We have Commissioner Mudge proposing that no single family dwellings be allowed in the backcountry unless they have 35 acres or more. And then we have others who would like to see our proposed single family dwelling square footage increased. I would love to hear from each of the planning commissioners and even county commissioners on their thoughts on those two kind of discussion points that were highlighted this evening.
Yeah, I guess just hearing that there's kind of the two extremes between not allowing single family dwellings and allowing large ones. I think that's the discussion we continue to have on these single family dwellings, and that's where the 900 square foot limit came in, was that was a nice middle ground between those two solutions. You know, we're allowing single family dwellings, but we're also very conscious of the size of them because we don't want people thinking of these as alternate residential lots. So that's why I say, you know, and it's also in line with some other communities that have done similar zoning rules, and those square footage limits seem to stick. So just putting in my 2 cents that I'm in favor of the 900 square foot for all eligible parcels remaining because it was a good compromise.
Thank you, Bryce. Joey Edwards.
Agreeing with Bryce, the intention of this zoning change is to minimize the backcountry impact. And the larger the size of the dwelling, the more environmental and resource impact we have. I was just thinking about sizes. And if you visualize a 900 square foot house, that's 30 feet by 30 feet. It's a good sized house for the backcountry. Not necessarily a large house in town, but that's really the whole point of what we're trying to do. And that was my note.
Thanks, Joey. I think Howard has his thumbs up, I think means he wants to.
Yeah, Heather, I agree with everything Bryce has said, as well as Joey. There was the intention of this whole thing is to limit the square footage. And I really thought a 600 square foot in the woods was fine. And I still kind of tend to that. And so 900 square foot, I have agreed with everybody, okay, now we really got a big one compared to a 600. But I still go by 900 and that's my vote.
I don't know if this, and I feel like we probably touched on this already, but there, I empathize with some of the folks that have like potential access or adjacent uses that certainly get utilities or some of those things that make it more feasible to have a single family dwelling. But I don't know if that's something we would consider, like if they applied maybe for like the resort or group camp, would that be an avenue for them, for those folks to then go through the conditional use process potentially, if they were really hung up on increasing their square footage? I don't know.
I think they would really have to be looking at something more of commercial use. So unfortunately, I don't think it would fall under that. And I tend to feel the same way. I have, empathy for some of these more site specific situations. But I keep coming back to those areas still being, relatively sensitive to the lands around them. I will say that I still lean towards the 1,100 square foot. I know that probably gives Howard a heart attack, but I know that the majority of folks really liked the 900, and both of which I feel like are within reasonable range for those areas, and regardless of the size would have to meet any kind of site plan review. So I think there's that, but I just don't see how we have the capacity to site specific decide that this person's site is acceptable for a 4,000 square foot house and this one's only acceptable for a 900 square foot house. I just think that could get fairly problematic over time.
Heather, I would just also, just a staff comment, this would be one of those substantial changes as well, to have to come up with a process because the findings would have to be made. It can't, we can say site specific, but we still need to have certain criteria and findings, that would even contemplate raising that. So this would be, I think maybe it's just probably good to note that kind of change would be, a substantial kind of change.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mudge, your hand was next.
Thanks, Heather. And I'm sorry to clarify, a change in the square footage would be a substantial, sorry.
No. What I was hearing was that on a case-by-case basis, you would determine what the square footage would be.
And I understand. I was just talking out loud.
Well, I hear
out loud, I guess, is what.
Yeah, certainly. I think that was great. I just wanted to add a little clarification.
Thank you.
I understand that, Abby, because I'm just still struggling. And to clarify, I might propose removing the single family home use if we removed certain areas that that already have that use happening nearby, like the Beaver Lakes area, where we know that they can meet the IRC and that use is in harmony, remove that from the backcountry. And then does that leave us with truly the area where we are thinking more primitive uses? So I just want to clarify that proposal on the floor to remove it altogether. I wouldn't propose that if we leave the boundary the same. And I'm also struggling with thinking about, there's a process for which you can, if it's commercial, you actually can't have a greater square footage. It's just the use that's the process for the conditional use. I think some people have been throwing out that if you had a commercial use and you did a conditional use permit, you can actually build bigger.
Well, if you have a conditional use permit, just to use Ty as an example, because he's here and we talked about the cookhouse, but let's say you were doing a cookhouse. The cookhouse is not a single family dwelling. So the conditional use permit would be, I am applying to build this size restaurant or this sized vacation lodge or this size hut, backcountry hut, for this commercial use, because it's no longer a single family dwelling. So it doesn't meet single family dwelling sizes because it's not a single family dwelling. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I'm not sure that it actually jives for me in the intent.
Not to say that we'll approve it. You know, if somebody comes in and says, well, I want a 5,000 square foot thing, I think we're going to say that that doesn't fall within the intent of the backcountry. And so I think the conditional use permit process gives us that leeway to be more site specific for those more commercial like uses. And Abby, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know if you were done, if you completed your thought. Sorry.
No, that was, yeah, I'm supportive of 900 square feet. I was just trying to think if there was other creative solutions for some of those specific parcels, but I certainly overall would really prefer to see this continue, just given the amount of effort and feedback that we've been yeah, just the amount of work that's already gone. I'd love to see it go through. So
awesome, thank you. Gail McDonald, you are back on the list.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Overall, I think we agree with the concept of trying to create a backcountry type of area. For us personally, because we have had this property for so long and we've watched how fast and how quickly Lake County has grown. But what we've seen is Ski Cooper is a resort. I mean, you're encouraging people to come up there, you're encouraging them to use the backcountry, you're encouraging them to be there. I guess I would just urge that we evaluate a little bit of these zoning districts or your boundaries and maybe look at the adjoining property to Ski Cooper that's already being operated commercially and kind of defining, maybe we define that boundary. Then I think that kind of changes what in our minds we're talking about. And I still go back to the other comment, 900 square feet may seem like a lot to many people or not enough, but I don't think that 900 is the maximum. And I just would strongly urge everyone to kind of really think about that. We're not talking about building above the tundra. We're not talking about above tree line, but simply on each of these applications, building permit application, what are you looking at for possibilities? So there's got to be a way to do that without just waiving kind of a backcountry zoning and saying, okay, now everyone falls into that. And I would just urge some creative thinking about it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Joey Edwards, you're next.
Going back to square footage restrictions on single family dwellings in the backcountry. The intention for these backcountry single family dwellings, I think, is to be a part-time home for most people. And people thinking about building something in the 900 or 1,000 square foot range it's small, it's compact, it's efficient, it fits into the environment, and it's something that you can walk away from for months at a time. As soon as we start looking at allowing somebody, because they have a larger parcel of land, to build a substantially larger home, the expectation of resources changes with the amount of money and amount of resources that are put into the size of the home. So while the person building a much larger home in the backcountry might fully understand that there is no fire protection, that there is no access, when they go to change property owners and the next person buys that substantially larger home, the expectation continues. So I think we'd be digging ourselves a hole if we allowed certain people at any time to build a much larger house in the backcountry zoning district just because of those resource expectations. What is the expectation of somebody for fire protection on a 900 square foot house versus somebody who built a 12,000 square foot house? It's something to think about just to protect ourselves moving forward as a county. That being said, I don't really have a problem with seeing the 900 square foot increased by a small percentage. I don't know that the impact of a 1,000 or 1,100 square foot house is that much greater than that of a 900 square foot house. So I wouldn't mind seeing that put under consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Great points. Commissioner Fiedler, you are next.
Yeah, thanks. So just trying to come back. My brain's been sort of wrestling with that trade-off between, how different, different size houses fit in different landscapes. And I think also the point that, we can't create something that's either, doesn't have clear criteria for staff to evaluate with future applications, or that's just like wildly complicated. I just wanted to throw out, I think this may be too broad brush, but I'm wondering if I guess a question for staff is whether this is possible within the sort of current process or whether it's a significant enough change. But I was wondering, we have very different size parcels, and I'm wondering if the maximum house size in square footage could be tied to the acreage of that parcel. So for example, just, doing like a 900 square foot house on a 10-acre parcel is like 90 square feet per acre, right? So on a small parcel, that's a very tiny structure. But if you have a much larger parcel, maybe then you're allowed, you could just take the same ratio, 90 square foot per acre of property, and on just much larger parcels, you're allowed, then the limit is a larger home. I think about that, it's still like a pretty broad brush criteria, but at least it's a clear rule that isn't just a wishy-washy, interpretive thing for a staff of the Planning Commission. To me, I think the problem is it still doesn't address some of the questions Commissioner Mudge was raising about, there being some areas where we're already seeing, access to utilities or, certain uses that might work. But again, I sort of offer that as a way to get away from a one size fits all for different size parcels. So again, to summarize, the idea to noodle on might be a maximum structure size that is tied quantitatively to the parcel size that it's being built on.
Heather, did you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Jeff, I would just have the planning commission and the board think about, we're creating a zone district. We're not creating for uses specific to every parcel within that zone district. We're trying to create a zone district that has an intent and that we're consistent throughout. And so if we start looking to try to design the use specific to the parcel, we are missing a certain part of just the cohesiveness of the district itself. So in as much as I would say that's an interesting idea, I would say, you know, if your question to me, is that a substantial change and something that I think that we would have to broaden outside of this application, I think yes.
Commissioner Marcella.
Thanks, Heather. That's a really interesting point that you brought up, Jeff, and I would be open to entertaining something like that. I just wanted to get some clarification, and because I think I may be confusing myself, and so I don't know if you can help me understand this a little better. The single family dwelling within the backcountry is not the same as a year-round single family dwelling within a subdivision, correct? Because of the intent of the code for this to be a part-time use.
No, a single family home is the exact same that you would find in a subdivision, and that is why the intent to limit the square footage, the impact to the natural environment, thinking about the fuel mitigation of larger structures within these areas, knowing that responders can't respond readily in these areas. So the use is consistent. The use isn't different. A single family home, other than the limitation on the size, is the same single family use that you can put into a subdivision within another area of the county. It still has to meet the building code. That slide kind of just went through a little bit of the changes. The limitation is on the size, third-party inspections, and a site plan review process specific to the land. But the use itself is the same, other than the site plan review and the size limitation.
Okay, thank you.
Bryce.
Thank you. Just had a couple of comments that came out as we've been listening to this. In regards to Ski Cooper and Tennessee Pass sleep yurts and everything, I think that the use currently and potential future uses are compatible with the backcountry zone intent. And I don't really think that the owner's use of that property is going to change much based on this zoning. Besides the square footage limit, which we're talking about. But I think that every use they currently have would remain. And further, that parcel meets a lot of the criteria and qualities that every other parcel that was included does, including being rural and remote on forested land, and it's a patented mining claim. So I feel like we can get into a slippery slope conversation if we start excluding one parcel or another for this, that, or the other reason, because I think every parcel has a case to be excluded and every parcel has a case to be included. So I also just wanted to get more clarity on what Commissioner Mudge is talking about with the parcels near Beaver Lakes that she thinks are, I'm confused. We want to take them out of the backcountry zone because they're good for single family dwellings, or we don't want single family dwellings there, or we should target this area for development that's not compatible with the backcountry development. I only know of a handful of parcels where this applies, where there is someone living there full time. We have the Lufkin property, which as far as I know is almost entirely under a conservation easement. And there's one beyond her that sounds like it might be for sale. And there's a couple other stragglers, but I can only count about 5 or less than 2 hands full of this being a case. And so I just struggle again with changing the boundaries for exceptions to the rule we've kind of established to draw these boundaries with.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Lupe.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to give my 2 cents, and just I want to emphasize what just Bryce shared, and it is through an equity standpoint, right? Like people are gonna say, folks are gonna say that their parcel or like the area that they own is just like they deserve some type of more square footage and more attention to what their area that they own. And so I think it just defeats the purpose if we just allow folks of just increasing the square footage of the backcountry zone structures. And so like if we allow one structure and then there's other folks that are going to start applying or want to increase their square footage. And I think if we allow more folks to start building structures in the backcountry, that would defeat our purpose, just like when in terms of like by increasing it, right? Like if more folks are increasing, we don't know the repercussions or the consequences that we'll have later on if just like more roads or like unofficial roads that are not part of the county, just like start creating more traffic. And so I think by just having this limit and just having this limit for a single family dwelling, that it will just like mitigate the situation when it comes in the future, right? Like we cannot reverse that situation, those consequences. And so I think I'm just letting folks know that I'm in favor of the square footage.
Thanks, Lupe. Natalie Lord.
Hi. So I just had some follow-up comments based on what you guys have been discussing. And one of my concerns with the limit of 900 square feet is that you're going to push. So sorry to reiterate where we are planning a full-time single family residence on our property, which is why we purchased it when we did. And we're currently under the minimum of 600 square foot, maximum of 5,000 square foot of when we purchased our land. So from what I read through the last public comment, if this passes and 900 square feet is the limitation, we will probably opt to go through the process of removing our lot, because we are literally attached to some of those large mansion areas that have $3.5 million mansions up to 5,000 square feet. So I don't want to do that because I think it's important to have our parcel included in this backcountry zoning. But what I fear you're going to do with the 900 square foot limitation is you're going to force owners to then build multiple buildings to accomplish what they want on their property versus a single family house that could include, all the uses that they need. So that was just one of the comments I wanted to make sure you guys.
Heather, I just have a quick comment to that. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that within the standards, you're only allowed 2 accessory structures, not to exceed the size of the primary use with the 2. So if you do have a 600 square foot backcountry structure, you're allowed 2 accessory structures, but not to exceed the 600 square feet between the 2. And if you have a single family home, you have 2 accessory structures available to you, not to exceed 900 square feet.
Thank you, Anne. Go ahead, Commissioner Mudge.
Thanks. I still don't feel like we've addressed a density issue though. And if you look at the area around Turquoise, and somebody can please just enlighten me. The area around Turquoise right now, you can only build a single family home, but you can't because you can't meet the code. So then if we pass this, now every one of those parcels could build a small backcountry structure. And I fear that would have an opposite effect of what the intent is here.
I would just, Sarah, just share that those 85 claims each have individual wells. And I think it would be possible potentially for them to do the 5,000 square foot house, just like that's already there on all 85 of those parcels.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be my question is what are the current in the current zoning, what makes them not buildable versus buildable after backcountry. Because water, you are allowed a well permit for each of those individual claims. So you do have water, and then you do solar. And then, like I said, if your pockets are deep enough, you have somebody install your septic. So then you're there. So I don't know.
What about road access?
Well, road access has to be determined for both of these, right? They have to say that they have road access. I think that that's the same. We're not changing road access requirements for either of these. We're not changing roads in the backcountry zoning district. That remains the same.
Sorry, I'm not understanding that answer. So they do need a level of access, or they don't need a level of access for if they were to build a single family home?
Those parcels have access in the summer.
Right.
So they have access to build 5,000 square foot single family homes.
Okay.
Yeah, we aren't proposing to increase access anywhere as far as that goes with the backcountry. I guess it's just what I was trying to clarify. So it's possible, just as I guess I feel like it's been possible to build on each one of those. But I think our proposal is that at least initially, it would be at a much smaller scale with the site plan review, hopefully canceling out any view shed concerns and environmental sensitivity concerns, whereas right now we have no process for that, for those guys to build on those.
I guess my other question would be, if you have a single owner who has 50 parcels, say, or even 10, and they want to build 10 units, does that, to me, that automatically triggers some level of commercial use? How do we deal with that?
I mean, I feel like that can happen in 4 seasons, right? Some same owner can own 6 lots and build 6 houses, but that doesn't make it commercial.
Well, under this code, short-term rentals would be banned as well, right? So they'd have to go
Right,
through
short-term rentals
traditional
wouldn't be
zoning
allowed.
process for any commercial use.
But you have it so that.
I mean, if you're asking if they can build them but not short-term rent them out, then sure, they could. But just as somebody could, like I said, in 4 seasons or wherever, you know, there's no regulation on how many lots and houses somebody can build upon. But they can't do.
Does somebody need 7 houses for a family use? I mean, what's the line that?
But I mean, I guess I'm trying to find out why somebody would do that if they can't short-term rent them.
That's what I guess that's what I'm saying, to find a loophole and skirt around what we're trying to do. Is someone going to try to do that? And then I guess, I mean, I know the conversation with staff, right? And land use is like, well, why are you building 7 to 20 units for your own family? Is that really not what do you intend to do there?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, I mean, are you saying like if they're just trying to short-term rent them without us knowing or something? Because otherwise I feel like, if the use is the use, if it's one single family dwelling per 10-acre lot or per lot that's up there, does ownership of that change the situation? Unless we're thinking that they're doing something against the rules, but then comes down to compliance. And then if people are breaking the rules, they're breaking the rules. I guess I'm not sure what somebody's motivation would be to do that. And then if they did, I guess, do we care unless they are skirting the rules? Do we care if John Smith owns 6 of them or if it's 6 different individuals, if it's the same code that they're meeting? I don't know.
I'm just wondering if it is the same does that trigger some level of conditional use permit because there's likely a different use intended? And maybe that's, sorry, not something really that we can even contemplate outside an application being submitted.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in and interrupt. I just, Sarah, if I'm understanding correctly, your question is if somebody has 10 contiguous parcels, like just on the east side of town, they can apply for 10 separate backcountry structures, I guess, if you will. And so we don't want the appearance of 10 structures within like 100 acres. Correct. That's the intent, right?
Well, I think I mean, like Heather said, that can happen whether it's the same owner or not. I guess I'm just trying. I don't know. I guess I just don't know that we have addressed really a density issue in some of these areas, but I'm sorry, let me think about that a little bit better because it also, I mean, I think about, again, like the sale of these properties as, you know, a second home or this or that. And what's to stop somebody from owning 50 of them, building something and then selling them for, you know, so much more. Although I guess when they build, then their use is clear and it's small and it's built to assume, you know, this new standard. I apologize. I'll stop thinking out loud. People.
I just want to interject for everyone, just to keep kind of scale in mind. Ag forestry, minimum lot size is 5 acres. Recreational, which is our rural residential, is 3 acres. So if the existing underlying parcels in their current configuration are around 10 acres and any new parcels can be 35, that density, when you keep saying, you know, that we're looking at the density, this is one of the lowest densities that we have anywhere other than RUR, which is a conservation minded zone district. So with no residential use, right? So when you think in the scale of our existing zoning, urban residential, 7,500 square feet is the minimum lot size. Recreational is 3 and ag forestry is 5. So we allow, you know, having this district where the majority of the parcels are 10 acres or greater, that's a much lower density than we have anywhere else that has any kind of residential use associated with it.
That's a good point, Anne, that a lot of them are 10 or greater, which is already greater than, yeah, the other zones. But I think this is where the idea of that 35 acres, I appreciate that to restrict and prevent subdividing of existing parcels, but in all reality, it's never going to get, you know, we're not going to see any of those 35 acres. It's, I guess to me, the intent, I'd love to have talked from the start of, and which I understood better from the beginning of the conversation, the potential to utilize that unit credit and requiring, you know, and incentivizing kind of a conservation of the existing parcels even further.
And Sarah, I hear that, and I would encourage the Planning Commission to absolutely think about that as potentially a further layer. I absolutely hear that.
Joey, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to reiterate on Commissioner Mudge's concerns, the entire intention of changing to the backcountry zoning is to minimize the size of the dwelling and to maximize the size of the new lot sizes or the new parcel sizes. So all we're trying to do here with changing the zoning is to minimize impact and minimize density. So it speaks directly to her concerns. That's exactly what we're trying to do with this new overlay. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. Okay, I think we've kind of talked out, unless anybody has any other thoughts on square footage and or the 35 acre minimum for building a single family dwelling. I would say the other outside area that I don't feel like we addressed was the Beaver Lakes Estates boundary, which Bryce brought up just a minute ago. And I'm a little confused on it too, just because where our boundary touches on Beaver Lakes Estates is the majority of it anyway is on the second filing section of Beaver Lakes Estates, which is the larger acreage parcels, most of which are more than 4 acres or so. And so to me, this is almost a very good natural transition into backcountry to move them in there. So I too echo a little bit of Bryce's question as to, is it because we're thinking that should be further developed to single family dwellings? Or I guess I'm just, and how that road infrastructure would look if we are, because there's no direct road access from Beaver Lakes in there as far as any major type road access for more higher density single family dwelling. So anyway, I just want to echo Bryce's question there and just get some clarification from Commissioner Mudge on the Beaver Lakes boundary. And I think maybe Commissioner Marcella echoed that same question. So I just wanted to reach that out.
I think, yeah, and I'm looking more closely at the map, and I think my thought was that it would be harder to meet the IRC in that area if it were left that you had to do that and weren't allowed to build a structure with less requirements. Keep it so that you had to meet a greater criteria in that area was my primary thinking. But I do also share that concern about the road access from both north and south and through the IM, because that's, these roads are not largely not maintained throughout the year. So my thought was to keep it restricted and not to necessarily enhance that, but yeah, I don't think that's I don't know, that doesn't necessarily seem appropriate to exclude now.
And Commissioner Marcella, does that add up on your end as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The other notes, and I could be missing some, so if there's something else we want to discuss a little bit more in detail, the other couple of things I think we had kind of addressed was just making sure that we clarify more so in our description when people were applying for backcountry and such that just reiterating the road situation, including in there that the county may close roads seasonally and property owner accepts that, that there would be more explanation that permits could be denied based on that site plan review. If there are environmental sensitivities that can't be overcome. And that commercial uses available under the conditional use permit process will be limited to those within, that are harmonious with the intent of backcountry zone districts. So those were the couple things that I had as notes that we want to make sure that we're really clear and upfront with people when they're going through the permit process. And so I think I captured most of those, unless anybody has any other thoughts there. And then, or if there are any other kind of outstanding concerns or discussion points on the code as a whole. So I welcome any additional comments. Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, before we get off of this meeting tonight, and so things I'd like to think about in the afterwards. Bryce, question for you again. When I was assessor, which was a long time ago now, I was pretty familiar with that area east of Beaver Lakes. And I haven't been up there for some time, but I believe, and I want you to correct me here if I'm wrong, I believe that the old Mitchell Ranch, which was bought by Lufkin, I believe that's a lot of acres there that is part of the conservation easement. And also, there's a couple of houses just at the edge of Beaver Lakes, almost into that particular area that are part of Beaver Lakes, but not part of the conservation area, the old Mitchell Ranch, I'd call it. Is that correct?
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, as far as I know, the Mitchell Ranch is 160 acres and it's been put into a conservation easement. Let me post this. Oh, chat's disabled. I have the backcountry zoning map linked to on the proposed land use page. And that kind of shows, I kind of updated it to kind of make the boundaries a little bit more clear and the parcels within it a little bit more clear. And also there's a layer on there now you can toggle on conservation land. So I don't believe the Lufkin property is listed on that layer yet because it's still in the process of getting onto the easement, but it's a good way to visualize how much land around that and around Beaver Lakes is already under conservation.
And Bryce, I have enabled your ability to share if you want to.
Zooming in on that area, you can see there was a former placer claim that was subdivided into the two filings of Beaver Lakes. This large square here is the Mitchell Ranch. And you can kind of see County Road 52, Dry Union, zigzagging through here.
Thank you, Bryce.
Oh, and then I can show you how much of that land, and this is kind of what I was trying to explain to Commissioner Fiedler, is just, it's a little bit deceiving, but there's a lot of natural breaks, both natural breaks, topographical breaks, and also just lands under conservation that are kind of breaking up this whole cluster of mining claims. And sorry that the projections are a little bit different. That's why they don't match up one-to-one.
Thank you, Bryce. Commissioner Mudge.
I'm wondering, I wonder what, and how would the additional layer work? And would that would be a separate process on instilling anything like a 35-acre kind of credit per unit? And I will also say, and Chris might pipe up if there's different context here, but I did ask legal about considering that for the backcountry zone, and the concern of it taking wasn't substantial because you're not completely removing the ability to do anything with the property. You're just adding the additional requirements having more property to build a structure.
So Sarah, what I was thinking and suggesting is actually more of an incentive program, similar maybe to a conservation easement itself, whereas conservation easements have tax advantages. We would have to determine how to incentivize it, but I would propose that, maybe having a work session to further layer on the ability for people to participate. But with reeling some kind of advantage out of doing such. So I guess I was proposing that the potential to come in and put a covenant on some of your land and establishing the use in just a specified area, much like a conservation easement, that maybe that could be a further discussion with the potential of some kind of incentive to do such. So maybe less from a regulatory idea and more from another program to incentivize further conservation in these areas. And so that's, I think, what I was talking about of potentially looking at kind of like a transfer of development rights kind of program that you're going to come in and be willing to put a covenant restricting building on certain areas and exercising the parcel in one area.
And just to clarify, Anne, are you saying that as part of this approval process, or you're saying that that would be like an amendment or a layer down the road that would add on to this?
Thank you, Heather, for clarifying that. Yes, so I am talking about something that might nicely accompany the current zoning proposal to incentivize further conservation by people that would do this voluntarily, but under some kind of an incentivized program.
Sorry, I still am a little bit unclear. So a company, you mean at the same time as this zoning application, or just.
So sorry, at a later date, a future discussion that would need to be vetted. So this is a new idea that we haven't researched nor put any kind of work into. It is a substantially new concept, and so it would be, I would propose it as a further work session between the Planning Commission and the board and researched by staff.
Thank you. Another.
Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
And what's the thought on potential future use conflicts if and when folks would want to also mine on these parcels next to now developed for residential with residential dwellings?
So Sarah, it's going to be, absolutely the same review. It's conditionally allowed right now under the current zoning, and it's going to be the exact same as any mining application anywhere. There will be the vetting through the state, through DRMS, and then in looking at the local impacts. So I don't, I would say that the impacts are similar, no matter whether the zoning remains the same or changes, and it's going to be the same impacts in these areas as it will be in anywhere else. So, and it will go through, the normal process of going through DRMS first to establish the mine boundary area and receive their permitting, and then have to go through the same vetting that we've done on any other conditional use permit to mine in Lake County. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Okay, any other discussion points and or questions? Gail McDonald, I see your hand up. If you have something new to add, then we welcome you to add additional comment.
I just wanted to ask, how long are conditional use permits good for?
Go ahead, Ann.
They run with the land, Gail. And I actually should just qualify that just a little bit. However, if you make a substantial change that wasn't, you've expanded or added something that wasn't included within your existing conditional use permit, then it would be time to come in and reapply, but conditional use permits run with the land.
Okay, thank you. Oops.
Okay, seeing no further comments or questions from public, I can entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Oh, I have one more that just sneaked in before I heard a motion. Henning Olsen.
Yeah, sorry to sneak in last minute. I had to step away for a minute. I guess just listening to all these discussions, I would just urge the group here to consider that there seems to be two extremes, right? The group I'm in is really looking forward to being able to build a small, low impact, primitive structure on my land. And I would really urge to kind of separate that issue from the people that maybe want to build something bigger on their land, and they're not, they're kind of lumped together in the same question now, just how this is kind of structured, this zoning. So I guess from a personal perspective, I just urge that, is there a way to move this forward without getting hung up on one of the issues, because they're not necessarily related, right? So that would just be my comment. If there's a way, if there are some challenges or roadblocks ahead, that they might be able to kind of separate the two topics to keep moving forward. That's all. So, and now I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Last minute's okay. Anybody else? Okay, do we have a motion to close public hearing?
I'd make a motion to close the public hearings for the hearing February 7th, 2022.
Second.
Okay, can I get all in favor, please?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. At this time, public hearing is closed. What happens from here is I think we can further discussion. Well, I guess closing the public hearing closes the public hearing. So this is where the county commissioners can be excused. And then we planning commission will then make a motion to approve this or recommend to approve to the county commissioners. They'll recommend any changes to the current proposed code before going there, if so deemed, and or they can propose to table this or propose to deny it and exclude it altogether. You're welcome to stay on and listen. We just can't take in any further public comment from here forward. After tonight, our recommendation will be sent to the county commissioners. They will then get to discuss amongst themselves tonight's hearing and our recommendation, and opt to either accept our recommendation, or they can accept our recommendation with their changes, or they can deny our recommendation. That's the process moving forward. Thank you again, everybody, for participating tonight and being a part of the discussion. We really appreciate the input and willingness to be excited about this as well. Thanks so much. Okay, Planning Commission, does anybody want to start with a motion in a second so that we can start discussion on a motion?
I'll move, we approve. Do I need to read from, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, and maybe, Ann, if you can just put that up on the screen or something, or you could read it.
Just read it, and then you can just say so moved. How does that sound?
Can I just clarify that we all were on the same, like, we're good on the square footage, we're just going to pass it as is, or is that?
You can discuss it through the motion.
Okay.
We'll do a motion on the table, and then once it's seconded, then it's open for discussion before final approval. If there's any amendments to the motion, then that is a separate motion that gets approved before the first motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of file number 2124, to the Land Development Code Amendment and Rezone Proposal to create section 4.2.12 BC Backcountry Zone District, amend table 4.1, amend table 5.1, add use specific standards 5.2.27, subsections 5.2.27.1 A through B, and 5.2.27.2 A through H. Chapter 9 definitions, and add use specific standards 5.2.25 camping and accessory use camping on private property, item 12. And further finding that pursuant to sections 3.8.9 and section 3.13 of the Land Development Code, the following approval criteria are met. A, the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, policies, and other provisions of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan and this code. B, the proposed amendment is necessary because of changing social values, new planning concepts, or other social or economic conditions. And C, the proposed amendment will promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. And D, the proposed rezoning is found by the Planning Commission to be consistent with the Lake County Comprehensive Plan.
So moved.
I'd second that motion.
Okay, now we can have some discussion on it. And to Bryce's point, we did have that kind of one of the outstanding items on here is what everybody's thoughts are on that square footage number. And I know we kind of went over some of our thoughts in the public hearing, but if anybody has any new thoughts they'd like to share or bring up to the group.
Heather, I have a question. You had suggested that the 900 square foot maximum footage be increased to 1,100 square foot. And I wanted to know what your reasoning was. I wanted to know why 1,100 square feet versus 900, please.
Sure. So actually it wasn't, I mean, I do propose we consider it going up now, but it was just originally I felt like it was less of a impact being slightly over 1,000 square feet rather than under. I guess in some ways a little bit arbitrary, but mostly just from the perception that I didn't want it to, I didn't feel like 1,100 square feet was that big of a difference from 900 square foot. And I felt like it may not feel as big of a blow to some of those backcountry type properties. I know a couple of existing kind of structures in those areas that are right on the verge of that 1,000 square feet. So some of that came from my personal knowledge of those existing. But I think again, the 900 versus 1,100, they're not a whole lot different in my mind. So if the group still feels good about 900, I'm happy to support that. My only leaning towards it now would just be in response to public comment to give a little in response to that. So just my.
And if I may, Heather, I totally agree with you. I think that giving just a little bit right now probably makes the process much smoother. It takes out a couple of objections, and being just slightly over 1,000 feet seems much more generous than being slightly under 1,000 square feet moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Joey and Heather. I think at this point it might be a really nice, easy win based on public comment. That's we've kind of dug our heels in on 900 square feet, but we've gotten a lot of feedback on it, so it might be worth considering it, especially considering like Summit has 1,000 square foot limit. So I think 1,000 or 1,100 is reasonable and doesn't change the intent or impact significantly.
All right, this is Tritz. I don't think a couple hundred square feet is going to cause a heart attack, so I'll go along with you all. Go for the 1,100. I'd like to see this thing put to bed.
Yeah, I know I don't get a vote, but I think 1100 is the right move. And I think we can definitely play up the like listening to people aspect. People did spend a lot of time and effort coming out here. And I don't think there's a measurable difference in the impact really at the end of the day. So let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's not going to still appease several of the folks that, you know, put forward comments on it. I'm sure they're looking for a lot more than that couple hundred square feet, but I think this is a great place to start. And I keep trying to circle back to that I just think I'm really proud of all of the work that everybody has put into this, and especially, but the work that everybody's put into this over the years, because it's finally here. And it just would be nice. I think we've built a really beautiful code that if we're in this a year or 2 years and we decide that, hey, this number isn't right, who knows? We could think it needs to grow. We could think it needs to shrink. But I mean, those can be things that we amend over time. I think that the current proposal encompasses most of what we all were hoping that it would in that vision. And, you know, we can guess all day long what's going to happen over the next few years, but I think that this is the tough part, right? Getting the zone change up front is the really hard and long, tedious process. The zone amendment changes, they may be difficult at times, but I think they're far less intensive as this. So I think that they're a lot easier to put forward and get going as we have this in place, and we can really gauge what needs to change and what needs to be adjusted over time. So that's just my couple of thoughts. What are the others' thoughts on that square footage change?
I may have just a quick question. I think, I know, you know, you don't need building permits for some of the accessory structures just because of minimum square footage or the max square footage. So I'm just curious, like if a person was building 1,000 square foot single family resident and decided to build 500 on top of it, would that require another site plan, or would that just be a building permit?
That's a great question, Abby. Really, really good question. And so accessory by nature can't be a dwelling unit. You know, it can't be habitable space because that would be an ADU, right? And ADUs are not allowed. So anything over 200 square feet is going to require a building permit. And they have to be accessory and subordinate in nature. So, you know, things like storage units, but they can't be habitable living space because those are accessory dwelling units and they're prohibited. So does that answer your question kind of?
Yeah, I was just thinking to I don't know, one of the folks in the public just talking about how having, you know, I was having to use some of those additional structures for livable space, but it seems like that would be something that we would watch out for in terms of compliance, building permit review, things like that.
Exactly. So the only habitable space that they can have is either their backcountry structure or their single family home. Accessory structures are within this area. You get one primary use. You can have accessory supportive structures, but they can't support sleeping, eating, doing those kind of things. They can be storage. They could be a well house, if that's applicable. They could be an outhouse if for you know, a pit privy system or a structure like that. So they could be supportive structures, but they have to be supportive to the primary use, and they can't be habitable and have habitation being supported within them.
That makes me feel good. I was just thinking if we were raising it to 1,100 and then potentially then raising the square footage for those accessory structures, but that no longer my concern. So thank you, Ed.
Just like echoing what everyone's saying, I know like 900 was what we discussed, but just increasing it 200 square footage is, I think that's should be fine, and just will with what public was saying, I think just increasing it to 1100, I would be totally fine, just for the standard.
Something that nobody's brought up but should be mentioned is loft space is not included in that total number. So an 1100 square foot house could potentially have 2 or even 3 lofts above it of usable livable space inside of that same square footage number. So these houses are not particularly small houses at 1100 square feet. There is quite a bit of usable and functional space that's included by allowing those extra lofts.
Great point. Thank you. I agree. So it seems like, and before we do an amendment to the motion, I want to just talk through the other couple of items I had on the list here, and then see if anybody else had some talking points or changes they wanted to propose. Oh, and also, Jamie, you may not vote maybe, but you are absolutely a part of the discussion. So feel free to be a party to the discussion, the entirety of this. The other item I had, well, and I guess I'm assuming that with our 1100 square feet, we're not really in favor of the 35 acre minimum for a single family dwelling.
No, I thought Ann brought up a great point about this is going to be the lowest density standard, or rather lowest density we have available and are holding ourselves to in the county. So I think that's a good effort. I do think there's merit to what Commissioner Mudge is talking about though, but I think, we need to get over this hurdle first, and then we can start talking about projects like transferable development rights and stuff.
Any other thoughts on that 35 acre minimum for building? Okay. The other item I had on here was the Beaver Lakes Estates boundary, and it seemed like Commissioner Mudge dropped that off after we had further discussion, but just wanted to make sure everybody feels good about our boundaries as we have them established at this time, because I think boundaries came up a couple of times tonight.
I don't think we should make any changes. I think it's been posted this way for a while, and yeah.
Okay.
Leave it.
Leave it. Okay. Those were the only things I had on here that I thought maybe were going to be potential discussion points for changes. Does anybody else have any items that they wanted to bring up or bring to light for it?
One other gentleman did bring up the point of bringing the backcountry structure size from 600 feet up to 750 feet, and I am against that change. I think 650 feet for a primitive structure is more than generous, and we should leave it as it sits.
Well, and to clarify, it's 600, but also the reason, a big reason for that delineation was it's one or the other, right? Once you reach that 600 square foot threshold, we felt that similar to the rest of the county, you're falling into the requirements of a single family dwelling. So I agree. I mean, I think backcountry structure is really just addressing those structures that are underneath our current minimum square footage of 600 for a single family dwelling. We weren't really looking at making primitive structures any larger than what our single family dwelling units start as. So I agree. Any other things? Okay, if not, we can take a motion to amend our our maximum square footage for a single family dwelling to the 1100 square feet.
I'll go ahead and move that we amend our max to 1,100 square feet.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the amendment has been approved. Is there any more discussion on the original motion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, guys. It's been a long night, but I super appreciate everybody and their effort, and I'm fingers crossed the commissioners keep liking it. Through
Good
next
luck.
Hey, we're good haul on our part, you know?
Yep.
Good job getting this far. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Out of our hands now. Okay, thank you guys so much. Now I can entertain a motion to adjourn unless people want to hang out and do anything else.
I motion to.
Ooh.
I'll move.
Abby moves.
Second.
Perfect. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.